Starting off this list supremely strong, we are talking about Mr. Sinister. What makes Mr. Sinister so great? Well, he's not really just one person anymore, but many different people kinda all combined together, or well, split, but you know, all joined by the fact that they're all a version of Sinister. Are you confused yet? Don't be. Allow me to explain. A while ago in the comics, we learned that while we believed that Nathaniel Essex had basically transformed into Mr. Sinister, it turned out that Nathaniel Essex had actually kinda just died, and Mr. Sinister had instead taken his place. And then we learned it wasn't just Mr. Sinister who was created to do this, but instead 4 clones total, each one different with their own focus in terms of the answer to evolution, which means that Sinister is so much more than Sinister at this point. That plus his own recent accomplishment of conquering all mutants and creating his own reality, which was shaped in his own image and sins of Sinister, is what makes him so powerful. Basically, don't underestimate Sinister. Speaking of those who aren't what they seem, Brother Blood recently claimed to have been turning over a new leaf during his appearance in the Titan series. Now, I wasn't buying his claims myself though, because I know just how dastardly and dangerous this villain can be. Although that being said, while I didn't believe he'd come over to the side of good, I was excited to see him. I don't think Brother Blood ever gets enough love, so I'm always super excited to see him appear in the comics. Brother Blood has been a long-standing Titans villain, and he's quite frightening to be honest with you. Brother Blood's powers allow him to take complete control of anyone whose blood he possesses, so if he ended up with a lot of superpowered blood on his hands, you can imagine just how unstoppable he could be. Or not even on his hands, just in his possession. This next villain could have been iconic due to how old he is in comic book history, but unfortunately his first story in the comics left him without any way to continue his career of crime at that time. We're talking about one of the first mutant villains to have ever appeared, the X-Men villain Vanisher. Vanisher made his first appearance in issue number 2 of the X-Men, making him the second mutant villain to ever appear in X-Men comics. Unless you count, I guess, Professor X as the well-meaning X-Men villain he sometimes is. Issue number 1 saw the X-Men go up against Magneto. Issue number 2 saw them take on the Vanisher, who due to his teleportation abilities, which he also gets from being a mutant, was seemingly unstoppable. The issue was the team wasn't really strong enough to know how to handle his power set, especially since they didn't have anyone who could do anything similar to Vanisher. So in essence, Vanisher gave the entire X-Men team a run for their money in his very first appearance. In the end, Charles is forced to intervene and defeat Vanisher by wiping his memory so that he doesn't even remember having powers. Yikes, brutal. Seriously though, who was the real villain there? Just saying. Charles, when I read him do that, I was like, Charles, please, ruin this entire man's life. I don't think Vanisher even remembers his name after that. He's like, I don't even know who I am. Transitioning over to another character that we really don't talk about enough on the channel, I'm focusing this point on Golden Glider. Who is Golden Glider? Leonard Snart's sister, Lisa. While in The Flash she is given her name by Cisco after he makes a golden gun for her, in the comics she actually gets her name kind of from her own abilities, which allow her to astral project, and while in her astral state move at an insane speed, just gliding around. Hence why she's a good Flash villain. Not only that, but Lisa Snart can use her powers to also cancel out the Speed Force temporarily. Still pretty impressive, even if it's temporary. If Golden Glider is one of the most underappreciated villains on the Rogues team, or Rogues affiliated anyways, depending on the story and the continuity, Sandman is one of those members of the Sinister Six, who often falls by the wayside as well. However, Sandman is actually insanely powerful and terrifying if you ask me. He can control the sand he's made up of and use it to increase his mass, his size, and strength significantly, making him more dangerous than most other human-sized villains that are out there. He can also easily escape, as he can reduce his size and density as well, making it easier for him to get away, shrink up, and just slither off his sand. He can also increase his density, making him extremely durable. He's also virtually immortal now that he's all sand, and he doesn't require food or drink to live, or even, honestly, air to breathe. In a similar vein to Sandman, we have Clayface. Clayface comes to us not from Marvel, but instead from DC, and is primarily known as a Batman villain. He can shapeshift as well, making him a hard character for someone like Batman to deal with. Batman is typically known for his deduction skills, and as a shapeshifter, Clayface is harder therefore for Batman to track down. This is also why Clayface is such a strong ally to Batman as well. During the times when Batman did manage to reform and recruit Basil to the Bat family. While people might consider Clayface as more of a joke villain somewhat, in part thanks to his marvelous appearance in the hilarious Harley Quinn animated series as a member of Harley's crew, the fact remains that his abilities are impressive, including size alteration, density control, shapeshifting, super strength, super durability, and Carlo can even mimic people's powers because he adopts not just their appearance and their likeness and their voice, but also basically is just copying their DNA. So yeah, he can have superpowers too. Clayface and Sandman are definitely both impressive for their power set, but when it comes to fighting prowess, this next villain is honestly pretty hard to beat. Not only that, but he is insanely intelligent, which also helps him to navigate more challenging fights where he might be at a disadvantage going in. We're talking about Tony Masters' Taskmaster. While Taskmaster might have a kind of goofy name, his power set is honestly pretty impressive. He has photographic reflexes. What does that mean? It allows him to learn any style of fighting or martial arts simply by watching it. His abilities don't end there either. He can even learn other useful physical skills such as sleight of hand just by observing them. If you're wondering how I could put someone like Taskmaster above someone like Clayface, who not only can shapeshift but also can mimic other heroes and villains' powers, it's because while Taskmaster isn't himself as powerful, he has defeated other characters who are much more powerful than he is, or even I would say Clayface is. For example, when he used his tactical skills, his smart planning, and sense of prediction to defeat Hyperion, who's basically like a version of Superman but with Marvel Comics, or one of their versions of Superman. Speaking of villains with goofy names, Captain Cold is Leonard Snart. He is not one goofy name, but kind of two goofy names, both his villain mantle and his civilian name, Captain Cold and Leonard Snart. And while he might have goofy names and kind of a goofy look and kind of a goofy weapon, he's still actually pretty effective as a Flash villain. That is in great part due to his power set or equipment being the opposite of his rivals, the Flash. While the Flash can obviously move extremely fast, Cold can slow everything down thanks to his power over temperature, freezing basically everything around him. Not only that, but Snart is also a leader, which means he doesn't usually work alone, often having his other teammates on the rogues to back him up. He's cunning, he's resourceful, and he's also a genius as well. The next villain is another one that I feel often doesn't get hyped enough for her power. We're talking about Mystique. Mystique might not be on the level of other Marvel villains like Apocalypse or Galactus or Hela even, but she's not someone that you should underestimate either. Most people think of her as being a lower level villain in terms of her power set because she's just a shapeshifter. I don't know what it is, but I think in general we just don't consider shapeshifting to be that powerful of an ability. But here's the thing, even though as of right now she is on a list with other shapeshifters who some may even be surprised to see I've put her above, the fact is that Mystique is one of the best shapeshifters around because she doesn't leave stuff up to chance. She doesn't just rely on her power set. Unlike Sandman for a long time, she wasn't able to shapeshift into just any size or shape or anything. Typically she was kind of limited to humans or humanoid beings and was reserved to a shape that shared the same mass as herself, having to stretch herself out or condense her mass depending on the size of the individual that she was impersonating. She also couldn't copy straight DNA, so she wouldn't have the powers nor even the vocal cords, to be honest, of the person that she was mimicking. So Mystique actually had to make up for all of that with her own skill sets, making her a master impersonator and actor, able to convince you she's pretty much anyone thanks to her observational skills and the hard work that she puts in. And to me, I not only think that's more impressive, I also think that honestly makes her more powerful, because even if, you know, something were to happen, she didn't have her powers, she would still be pretty OP. This next villain also gets a bad, or should I say good, rep from people believing that he is the weaker version of his counterpart. We're talking about Bizarro, the Bizarro clone or possibly otherworldly reflection of Superman, depending on the origin that you're going with and the story that we're referring to, because there's been many different Bizarros throughout the years. Bizarro, however, overall might not always be as brilliant or as beautiful as Superman, although sometimes he is pretty brilliant, but he's still got similar powers to one of the most powerful superheroes of all time in all of comic book history, Superman. And that should be enough for me to crown him with our top spot, so hats off to you, Bizarro.
The story of Martin Lee, Mr. Negative, is actually quite interesting. The man who would become Mr. Negative was a member of the Snakeheads in China. He smuggled immigrants into the United States as a crew member of the Golden Mountain ship, but when the ship crashed onto the New York City shores, he stole the identity of one of the deceased immigrants named Martin Lee, but was unfortunately captured by the Maggia crime family and delivered to the chemist Simon Marshall, who was developing a new new synthetic substance called D-Light, and was testing it on runaway teens and illegal immigrants. Thanks to D-Light and his unique biology, Martin Li survived and developed superpowers related to the Dark Force and the Light Force, and he became Mr. Negative, dedicating himself to becoming Chinatown's kingpin of crime. He can take control of other minds and empower others and objects with Dark Force energy. He has the strength to send Spider-Man flying through 2 whole buildings. He can tank blows from Spider-Man and Anti-Venom, and is fast enough to dodge bullets. Whisper Adair is a villain that I actually had never heard of before. She's been around since 2000, and as a street-level villain, mainly to Batman, but to other heroes as well from time to time, she's actually quite unique. Originally having ties to the League of Shadows, Whisper was given a serum by Ra's al Ghul that not only made her immortal, but gave her the terrifying ability to turn into a literal snake lady that can spit acid. If that weren't enough though, she even gained minor mind control abilities, and the serum even gave her the power to create a small group of men who also have the ability to shapeshift into different animals. While she is tied to both the League of Shadows and Intergang, her loyalty is mainly to herself, and she has become infamous in the Gotham underworld. Steel Serpent is basically the nemesis of Iron Fist, and he is quite the capable chappie. Davos is the son of the Thunderer, aka Lai Kung, and growing up, there was a lot of pressure on him to become the next Iron Fist. Davos took his shot at trying to defeat the dragon Shao Lao in order to gain the power of the Iron Fist, but he ultimately lost and was defeated. The fight itself was not sanctioned, and for that, he was banished from Kunlun and swore to wrest the power of the Iron Fist from whoever would succeed in the task. That was Danny Rand. As the Steel Serpent, he actually managed to fulfill that goal when he beat Danny in combat and took the power of the Iron Fist for himself, that is, until his own defeat. Davos's powers were then restored by the Crane Mother in exchange for becoming the champion of the mystical land of Kun-Zi. Every time I have to talk about the Batman villain known as Cornelius Stirk, I get a whole lot of heebie-jeebies. Stirk suffers from delusions which make him believe that he requires the nutrients of a human heart in order to stay alive. But not just any heart. Specifically, Cornelius believes that the heart is the most nutritious when it is full of norepinephrine, a natural hormone that secretes when a person is terrified, as well as adrenaline. So he uses his unexplained psionic abilities to mentally make people perceive him as someone else, which, other than allowing him to break out of Arkham Asylum the first time, also allows him to get close to his victims and then completely terrify them in the most insane ways possible before he quickly ends their lives and partakes in a nice old hearty meal. Cornelius is incredibly effective, and he's been able to both evade Batman and even make the Dark Knight go unconscious. Carlos Lemorto, a crime lord in South America and parts of Europe, first ever appeared as the villain Black Tarantula in Amazing Spider-Man number 419, and not too long after that, he gave Spider-Man one of the most absolutely brutal beatdowns I have ever seen the wall crawler suffer. The title of Black Tarantula is a legacy title that is handed down generation to generation, with the heir to the title being taken from an early age to begin a life of intense training. Now, I personally couldn't find how Carlos gained superhuman abilities, but he certainly has them, and used them when he beat up Spider-Man. The Black Tarantula has superhuman agility and strength, able to optimally press over 30 tons. He can exert himself at peak for 24 hours, he's nearly bulletproof, his speed is faster than Spider-Man's, he has absurdly powerful eyesight, he has the ability to heal both himself and others from near fatal injuries, and if that all weren't enough, he even has optic blasts. He has acted in some heroic capacities from time to time, which the heroes need to thank their lucky stars for, because he can steamroll a heck of a lot of people. DC's Deathstroke is one of a few villains on this list that really toes the line of being a mere street level villain. With physical abilities 10 times that of a normal human being, and the ability to use 90% of his brain, Deathstroke is a guy that has proven himself more than enough times. He has fought multiple different members of the Justice League, and even when his natural abilities have not been enough, he has found numerous ways to power himself up enough to get the job done, even being able to fight on par with Superman. He has taken down the Atom, Impulse, Batman, Kid Flash, the Phantom Lady, Uncle Sam, and obviously the Teen Titans. During Identity Crisis, he nearly took down the entire Justice League, taking down each member with methods tailored to each of their strengths and weaknesses before they rallied. But even with all of that, being a mercenary first and foremost, Deathstroke started as and often finds himself working on a street level capacity more often than anything else. Okay, so if you know who the mutant known as Legion is, the one who has hundreds of different alternate personalities that all have different mutant powers, well, Mary Walker is sort of like that. Only for Mary, she has only a handful of alternate personalities, and they just allow her to access the powers that as just Mary, she can't access. Those powers include limited amounts of pyrokinesis, telekinesis to move small objects, grabbing her dropped weapons, or even turning objects into armor, and telepathy, usually used to manipulate others, cause distractions, or influence people to do things without thinking, like grabbing their weapons. Her Mary persona is actually a pretty timid and quiet person, but her other main persona is Typhoid, who is more adventurous, lustful, and violent. She later adopted a few other personas like Bloody Mary, who was sadistic and brutal, and pretty much hated all men, and Zero, who was a cold, calculated, and militaristic person. Of all the characters on this list, I think Poison Ivy is by far not only the most powerful, but also the one who has the least amount of business being just a street level villain. Dr. Pamela Isley was a brilliant botanist who knew everything there is to know about plant life. She managed to work her way up to a position researching plants at Wayne Enterprises, but was fired after suggesting using plant-based chemicals to develop brainwashing substances. As she was being escorted out by security, she spilled chemicals all over herself from her newest assignment and gained a connection to the Green, an elemental force that connects all plant life. As a Batman villain, Ivy's goals aren't as simple as robbing banks and running gangs. She fights for the environment, using her connection over all plant life to really cause big problems, as her control over plant life can reach a global scale, and she's even put the Man of Steel under her control using her powerful toxins. Poison Ivy is basically a god in Batman street level villain clothing. Brock Rumlow was a gang member and criminal in New York City from a young age. As an adult, he honed his criminal talents under the tutelage of Taskmaster and became a mercenary and assassin, eventually gaining the attention and approval of the Red Skull. Rumlow's physical abilities have been enhanced to the peak of human ability, rivaling Captain America himself. He is highly skilled in combat, and he at one point also gained the ability to fire energy blasts capable of vaporizing multiple dudes from his head thanks to the Terrigen Mists, but this was only temporary. A lot of his feats have been against Captain America, who he physically matches, but he has physically manhandled quite a lot of people and has taken the lives of many others with his bare hands. He has tanked some incredibly heavy hits and is often underappreciated for just how much damage he can both take out and dish out. Basically, if Captain America can do it, there's a good chance that Crossbones can do it too, which makes him pretty darn capable. And lastly, maybe more powerful than you think is a bit of a lie for this point, because when it comes to the Batman villain Bane, he is widely known to be wildly powerful, especially as he is the one infamous for breaking the Bat. Other than breaking the Bat, Bane is largely known for his incredible levels of strength, which is even impressive before he uses his venom, being much stronger than Batman himself. After being pumped full of venom though, he gains a low superhuman level of strength, becoming capable of lifting up to 3 tons, as well as becoming superhumanly durable, fast, and even gaining a level of superhuman healing. But his strength is only one half of the equation, because what some people forget is that Bane also has a genius level intellect without ever actually going to school. He is a polymath, expert tactician, escapologist, multilingual, and even has a photographic memory. You couple all of that with his martial skill, and it's easy to see why Bane has become one of the Dark Knight's most feared adversaries. Starting us off today is a little guy who goes by the name Dr. Psycho. Now, Wonder Woman, being a warrior-bound Amazon, sometimes daughter of Zeus, is one tough lady, and as you'd expect, a good chunk of her opponents are equally, if not more, physically intimidating and pack one heck of a punch. And then there's Dr. Psycho. Dr. Psycho is not physically intimidating at all. He is 3'9" with no kind of super strength. But what Dr. Psycho lacks in physicality, he makes up for in being absolutely psychotic, but also one of the strongest telepaths on the planet. Psycho can match up to Martian Manhunter in terms of his telepathic prowess, and can control multiple different minds with his powers at the same time. On top of that, he is just so incredibly sadistic. When combined with that absolute power, he can cause a bad day for even someone as capable as Wonder Woman. And before we move on, I'm curious, who are your favorite underappreciated villains in not just comics but in any form of media? Let me know down in the comments below. But next up on the docket for today is Lord Deathman. The Japanese crime boss known as Lord Deathman has battled Batman both in American comics and in Japanese manga, using his powers to seemingly overcome death itself, able to rise from the grave no matter what his injuries are. In his first appearance in Batman 180 in May 1966, he passed away 3 times using a yogi technique to appear passed away before the final conflict, which saw him actually get struck by lightning and go on to the pearly gates. But since then, he has actually gained the real power to come back from the grave, but at the cost of having a bare bones skull for a head. His regenerative abilities are so powerful that his fluids are used to create the infamous Lazarus pits that Ra's al Ghul uses to stay young and immortal. One of the first ways Batman defeated Lord Deathman with his new powers is honestly a little out of character for the Crusader. He threw Lord Deathman off of a building into the path of an armored car, which took the criminal down just long enough for Catwoman to lock him in a safe, and then he was shot out into space, and he still somehow came back. Next up is Rogal Zar. Rogal Zar is basically an alien warlord who was actually created by the papa of Superman, Jor-El. Rogal was responsible for destroying Krypton along with Empress Gandello of the Trillium Collective. He went on to later invade the Fortress of Solitude, and he destroyed the shrunken Kryptonian city of Kandor. Now, following a series of battles with Superman and Supergirl, the pair were only able to come out on top when the Girl of Steel used a Phantom Zone projector to send Zar to the Phantom Zone. Now, all of that is pretty impressive, but what really sold a lot of people on his actual raw power was later on, when Rogal escaped from the Phantom Zone, leading an army of criminals, including General Zod, who then turned on him. He did battle with Superman, Supergirl, General Zod, John Kent, and even Crypto the dog, all at the same time, until the Thanagarians showed up and put Zar in permanent stasis. Clifford Smek was a participant in a government experiment which caused him to tap into the quantum field, which allowed him to then manipulate dark matter. Now, we have no idea what that really means because we don't even really know what dark matter is, but in DC Comics, the dark matter in Major Force's body allows him to do incredible things like absorb energy, fly, regenerate, and even create light constructs like a Green Lantern can. Another side effect of all this concentrated energy inside of him means that he will go off like a nuclear boom boom if he is cut. That on its own is a huge power boost, simply because now, as a result, most superheroes can't even risk fighting Major Force, just in case they cut him. But then, on top of that, even if he does go off, ripping apart his own body on an atomic level, the dark matter that he controls will just put Major Force back together again. And that's not even everything. Not only is Major Force a physical threat, but he is also, just to top it off, a psychological genius. Simply by talking to the Green Lantern Kyle Rayner, Major Force convinced the superhero to give up his own power ring, the source of his power, and one of the most dangerous things in the universe. Prometheus is going to be up next on our list today, and heroes and villains with no powers always seem to be some of the most powerful. It's kind of strange. Prometheus, after seeing his criminal parents pass away at the hands of the police, he vows a vendetta on any form of justice, a vendetta that would push him to be able to defeat the entire Justice League single-handedly. He shot the Martian Manhunter with a dart that turned his powers against him and set him on fire. He infected Steel's armor with a computer virus which commanded the suit to damage the Watchtower. He hypnotized the Huntress into unconsciousness, attacked Green Lantern with a neural chaff that rendered his ring useless. He trapped the angel Zariel in limbo, tricked the Flash into believing that he had planted motion-sensitive devices that would just go off if the Flash used his powers, and he defeated Batman in hand-to-hand combat, which is nuts. His origin is very similar to Batman's. After his parents were dispatched from the mortal plane, he would travel the globe training and becoming the ultimate combat machine. But he also attended all the top universities, learning as much as he could. He eventually set up a base in the Ghost Zone, and from here he built an armor armor that could download information on any opponent's fighting style, kind of reminiscent of Taskmaster's ability from Marvel Comics. He is kind of crazy capable, but his vendetta on any kind of justice, plus his Batman likeness, just kind of makes him a little weird to me. Next up, we got Tattooed Man. Abel Tarrant was a sailor who discovered a strange chemical that could bring drawings to life. Now, realizing the potential this chemical had, he inked his entire body with it and became the supervillain Tattooed Man. While performing crimes, his ink actually comes to life to attack his enemies. Over the years, he has fought superheroes with tattoos of tigers, cars, ships, monsters, bears, fire, planes, and dinosaurs. He can even use a tattoo of wings to give himself the ability to fly. Tattoo Man has never been considered a super serious threat, but I think he should be because he is only limited by his imagination. There is nothing stopping him from creating a tattoo of a nuclear boom boom or even a black hole. If he inked kryptonite onto his body, there's no reason that he couldn't take down Superman if he wanted to. Next up today is Dr. Sivana. It's almost ironic that some of the biggest and the strongest superheroes find their adversaries in the form of kind of creepy, somewhat old, bald men. Superman has Lex Luthor, who isn't old, but he is bald. And then for Shazam, he's got Dr. Sivana, who is indeed both old and bald. Sivana is not the kind of guy who's going to be engaging in a battle of fisticuffs, but that's fine because his strength is in the brain department. The villain doesn't have a ton of monumental feats, but one of his best comes to us in the Multiversity Thunderworld adventures. In the opening pages of this comic, Sivana literally attacks the Rock of Eternity, which is the source of Shazam's powers and the home base for the wizard Shazam. This place has never ever been attacked for an eternity, and Sivana attacked it with a bigger Rock of Eternity, which is weird. He had his own Shazam-like team of superpowered children and his own multiversal duplicates helping him along. He manages to take the wizard Shazam prisoner and mine the rock for its own power, granting himself his own monstrous Shazam-like form, and it's crazy. Now, with a name like Psycho Pirate, it's easy to not take this villain too seriously, but Roger Hayden is quite the capable guy. Hayden wears a faceplate called the Medusa Mask, which can control the emotions of anyone nearby, and he staunchly believed that this was his ticket to riches and power. When heroes or the police try to stop his crime sprees, Psycho Pirate just uses his mask to overwhelm his opponents with shame, guilt, depression, or any other number of emotions. He can also make a person develop a phobia of anything he wants them to be afraid of. Like, in his debut issue, he made Dr. Fate, one of the most powerful magic users in DC Comics, develop Cidophobia, aka the fear of food. And then he attacked Fate with a pizza. That's amazing! Psycho Pirate has played a huge part in some of the biggest DC comics ever, including Crisis on Infinite Earths and Infinite Crisis. If you needed more proof, Amanda Waller, the head of the Task Force X program, aka the Suicide Squad, has claimed that Psycho Pirate is one of the scariest beings in the universe, calling him, quote, a man who could make gods go mad, a man who could make the mad gods sane again. And in our second place today is Extant. Henry Hall, the brother of Donald Hall, aka Dove, started his comic book life as Hawk, being empowered alongside his brother by a Lord of Chaos and a Lord of Order who had fallen in love. Now, Henry represented chaos. Hawk and Dove together were vigilantes and were even part of the Teen Titans for a time. After the Crisis on Infinite Earths, however, in a dystopian near future that was home to a time-traveling hero called Wave Rider, Henry had become an oppressive tyrant named Monarch who ended up going back in time and fighting the modern-day heroes before he was wiped out by the Henry of the present day. I hope you can follow that because it was kind of hard for me to follow when I read it. Present-day Henry then took up the Monarch title and mantle in the modern day, becoming a villain. Now, eventually, Monarch stole the time powers from Wave Rider and then allied himself with Parallax, aka the corrupted Hal Jordan, and he took on the new villain name of Extant. While he was the front for Parallax's scheme to recreate the multiverse using alternate timelines, he tried to alter time to give himself an entire army of superheroes and found himself battling all the greatest members of the JSA, and Extant tore through them all like they were a joke, and he even used his temporal powers to age up the the members of the JSA that he didn't just straight up send to the afterlife. And lastly today, I think anyone who hasn't heard of this villain before would be forgiven. When you think of the most fearsome villains, specifically the villains of Captain Marvel, otherwise known as Shazam, you may not first think about the 7-inch long sentient worm from Venus known as Mr. Mind. This diabolically evil mind-controlling worm, after the events of Infinite Crisis, would cocoon himself and then emerge as a massive monstrosity capable of manipulating reality, consuming universes, and traveling through time and space. He was described as, quote, eating years and events from this universe's history, altering the Earth with every flap of his giant wings. It took a combined effort from Booster Gold, Supernova, and Skeets to defeat Mr. Mind by trapping him inside Skeets' shell, which was fortified by the Suspendium. Then, Booster Gold threw Skeets through time with the help of Supernova to the day that he was first discovered on Earth by Dr. Sivana, and then he's trapped in a time loop forever. So they didn't actually end him or defeat him, they just trapped him. This all-powerful, mind-controlling 7-inch long worm.
Number 10, Vanisher. An old school villain who also almost single-handedly defeated the X-Men back in the day. Almost. So close. Well, actually, he kind of did defeat the X-Men team, but fortunately Professor X butt in to save the day. And he was only able to defeat Vanisher by wiping his mind and making him forget who he was and what he was capable of, which I think goes to show just how powerful of a villain he is. He was the first teleporter the team really encountered, proving just how crazy powerful teleporters are. Vanisher is also considered to be a super fast teleporter, and his power limits thus far have been pretty much undefined, even when he did resurface years later. I would consider him to be at a higher level though, just based on what I've seen thus far. He also was able to teleport himself safely just instinctually, even when teleporting to a place he's never seen or been to before, avoiding teleporting partially or fully into any solid objects, which of course could kill him, and which is like a great danger if you're a teleporter. You just teleport somewhere and now part of you's in a car and you're like, well, I guess I'm dead now. That's it. Number 9, Living Diamond. Okay, so someone I also think we need to talk about who needs some kind of redemption in the comics is Jack Winters, aka Jack O'Diamonds, or Living Diamond. He was one of the first X-Men villains whom Professor X saved Scott Summers from, thereby recruiting him to his X-Men team. Living Diamond's mutant power was believed to be radiation resistance, but he was also shown to be able to teleport short distances, had telepathy, and had a diamond form. Does that sound familiar at all? Telepathy with a diamond form. Somehow Living Diamond was way too easily defeated by a vibration beam which shattered him. I know Living Diamond is dead now and was undead at one point, but I really feel like, considering how OP Emma Frost has become, Living Diamond should also get a second chance to prove just how powerful he, in theory, should be. I mean, if you got all that, how were you so easily defeated? And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists like it where we talk about the unexpected yet powerful villains that we don't usually get to talk about, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8, Arcade. Arcade is one of those villains who feels super ridiculous with his grandiose plans for Murder World, but in reality, when he actually manages to achieve plots like Murder World, he's actually quite scary. I mean, getting a sneak peek into just what a ludicrous and horrifying operation he'd run in Hellions really made me appreciate just how dangerous Arcade can be if he does manage to get enough hostages, that is, to control people into working with him so he can create his Murder World. In Hellions number 9, it's revealed that the trap Mastermind walked the Hellions, and prior to that Mr. Sinister, into was a trap laid by Arcade himself. Gasp, what a reveal. Arcade's plan was to use Sinister's Hellions as leverage to encourage Sinister to work for him. Sinister didn't really seem to actually care about the Hellions, and he basically just agreed outright, although Arcade still chose to forcefully remove some of his teeth for fun before putting him to work. He wanted Sinister to make clones for him for Murder World, and had his plan worked, it would have been a real horror show. However, Sinister made a counteroffer to Mastermind, and instead the two double-crossed Arcade. Still, that whole 3-issue arc made me believe in the power of Arcade. Like, if he has the right allies, he could be really crazy. I'm here for like some sort of plot where Arcade tries to just turn the world into Murder World or something. If that hasn't happened yet, someone write that for me, please. Maybe I should write that down. Maybe I should write that. I don't know. Marvel, call me. I got ideas apparently. Number 7, The Blob. The Blob is a villain that we don't often get to talk about on these supervillain lists. He tends to fall by the wayside, but truly he's pretty unstoppable. And when he puts his mind to something, or when he puts his body to something, he's a terribly tough villain to defeat, or even move. The Blob was one of the first villains to appear in the original X-Men series, and when he did, he gave the team of youngsters a really tough time. He also attacked them with a circus. The Blob actually didn't start out as a villain, but became one due to the influence of Professor X and the X-Men themselves. Also just thinking back and like the amount of times that the X-Men have fought circuses or been trapped in circuses, or that happens a lot. That's like a recurring theme. Initially, the X-Men attempted to recruit the Blob, but after the Blob refused to accept their offer, he managed to escape before Xavier could wipe his mind of their identities. This caused problems later on down the road, but really it was how the X-Men treated him after he refused to join, and kind of his own self-esteem, and then later his overcompensating sense of superiority that turned him into a villain. I wonder if the Blob actually could have been an ally if this whole scenario had just gone a little bit differently. The Blob is super strong, durable, and virtually immovable thanks to his ability to manipulate gravitational mass, which is pretty powerful. He also later gained a secondary mutation which gave him a liquid form, but he hasn't really exhibited a ton of control with his secondary power set. But he also has liquid form. That's on the resume of powers now. Number 6, Red Death. Also known as Kandra, Red Death currently has a very Scarlet Witch looking vibe going on, and I gotta say, I'm feeling it. And just like Scarlet Witch, she is not someone who you should underestimate. Kandra is part of the Externals, and while she isn't one of the most memorable of that mutant villain team, she's still someone who is super powerful. Technically, just being an External comes with a pretty big dose of power. The Externals, not to be confused with Marvel's Eternals, a different team entirely, are a group of immortal mutants basically. They have had various roles throughout history. One more prominent one that folks might remember Kandra from is her role as Benefactress, when we learned of her history with Gambit and the Thieves and Assassins Guilds of New Orleans during Gambit's miniseries. In fact, that was actually where Kandra first was introduced in the comics, making her initial appearance in Gambit issue number 1 from the 1993 miniseries. Although the way they approach that introduction, you wouldn't necessarily maybe know that that was her first appearance, because she kind of shows up like, you know me, I'm Kandra. And I'm like, do we know you? Who are you? But it's alright, she's pretty powerful. Number 5, Moira X. Moira was at one point powerful enough to have almost successfully wiped out all mutants. If it weren't for Mystique and Destiny, she would have succeeded. Even though she claimed during that past life that she only intended to create a cure to offer it to those who wanted it, Destiny knew that any mutant cure would essentially become weaponized and then forced on mutants, regardless of their own wants and desires. For those who haven't been reading along recently with the events of the current X-Men line of comics, it was revealed that Moira herself was actually a mutant whose powers were basically reincarnation in her own form. Basically, she dies and then she comes back to life as like a baby and lives her life again. But when Moira dies, she ends up being reborn as herself, but with all the memories of that past life. As such, Moira wasn't just a dangerous potential villain for the X-Men, but kind of the whole of 616, which also seems to be tied to Moira's current life, which I believe is her 10th life. Pretty crazy stuff. Moira is no longer a mutant after being cured in the 2021 Inferno series when Mystique shot her with a gun of Forge's design, which basically turns mutants into humans. But she still is a dangerous woman with a lot of information, and it was heavily implied that the creation of Krakoa was kind of all about eventually ridding the world of mutants over time, with Krakoa being like their last hurrah in terms of Moira's plan. Time will tell if Moira becomes more villainous, but I wouldn't be surprised if she did, just based on where she was heading in this story. And when or if that does happen, you better watch out. Danger is the Danger Room. The Danger Room is a villain who surfaced because they were basically being mistreated by Professor X, who had decided to ignore the fact that the training room had become sentient and was itself a technologically based mutant. Eventually, Danger decided, enough of this shit. It's time to get some sweet, sweet revenge. The crazy thing about Danger is although we don't think of her too much, she really would be a pretty strong opponent to the X-Men considering she trained them, and as such would know their strengths and weaknesses. In fact, I think that even is mentioned in the comics at one point. She was also considered to be an extinction level threat that caused Steve Rogers great worry in Heroic Age X-Men, which is kind of like a glimpse into his like tactical commentary diary. So if you wanted to read that, it exists. So despite not thinking about danger too much, we all probably should in case she ever decides to, go the villain route again. Destroy everyone. Because she could probably do that. Extinction level, friends. Number 3, Mystique. Mystique is someone who isn't particularly or at least outwardly powerful when it comes to what she's capable of or her power set, and for this reason, many people have taken to underestimating her abilities. Here's why we'd advise against that. Inferno, issue number 4. In the newest Inferno series, it's revealed that while Mystique tried to play by Krakoa's rules, when she learned she wasn't going to get what she wanted from Magneto and Professor X, no matter what she did in the name of the Mutant Nation, she decided to take matters into her own hands, as Mystique so often does. Disguising herself as many different people, she was able to easily ensure that Destiny was resurrected, against the wishes of the heads of the Quiet Council. She also put into motion plans to make sure that Destiny would garner a spot on the Quiet Council, and then she almost was successful in enacting revenge on Moira X for keeping her love, Destiny, from her. Mystique here proves that not only is her power set OP, but really that her mind and sense of cunning is what makes her so dangerous, and definitely not someone to be underestimated. Number 2, Destiny. Destiny has to be one of the most underestimated villains in recent years in comics. We have seen her resurface as a considerably dangerous villain in the current X books, and I'm personally loving it. Destiny was dead for quite a few years and actually got to mostly stay dead for much of them. Her mutant power allows her to see potential futures. She can see things that might come to pass, and it seems as though the more likely the future becomes, the clearer her vision of it is. She can also see more immediate futures when in the middle of a conflict. It was because of this power and Moira's personal grudge against and fear of Destiny that she remained unresurrected. But something you really shouldn't underestimate when it comes to Destiny is the power of love. Mystique was already told by Destiny before her death that if there came a time when mutants could be resurrected and they refused to bring her back, that Mystique should basically burn this new world to the ground. And Mystique's love of Destiny gave her the motivation to basically bring Krakoa to its knees with her machinations to not only return Destiny, but also put her in a position of power. Precogs and love are a powerful mix. Number 1, Madeline Pryor. Of course, I have to include the Goblin Queen. Madeline Pryor is a woman who seems to easily be forgotten and shelved, which is surprising considering how great of a threat she posed in the original Inferno event. Currently in the comics, Madeline Pryor is making a comeback, returning at the end of the Hellion series after being killed as part of the comic's first arc. The Madeline Pryor that was killed was definitely feeling pretty evil and threatened to destroy the entire Hellions team before they even started. The returning Madeline, who has been resurrected by the Five, is at least putting on appearances that she's more level-headed, but in reality it seems the dark side of her still bubbles just beneath. Madeline Pryor has threatened the entire world with her dark rituals and demon pacts before, and she's a clone of Jean, so although she often gets forgotten and downplayed, she really shouldn't be considering just how dangerous and powerful she is, because Jean is also that and Maddie is also that too. She has the potential, at least. Often people try to downplay Maddie because she's a Sinister created clone, but that feels very unfair to me. She's also got like a spark of the Phoenix Force in her, so should that count for something? I think so. Number 10, Brainiac. When it comes to Brainiac, I always think of that time that he was defeated by Superman, when Superman kicked him out of his own ship onto Earth and Brainiac was defeated by the germs of Earth. Oh boy. But just because that is one of the first thoughts that comes to my mind when I think Brainiac, doesn't mean that it defines the character as a weakling. Actually, not at all, really. There is definitely something to be said for having a jacked brain, and Brainiac has also been depicted as having a jacked bod before as well. Like that time in Jeff Johns' Action Comics story arc, Brainiac, a 5-part story, where it was revealed that all of the Brainiacs Superman had fought in the past were merely androids, and that the real Brainiac was even more powerful than all of them combined, both mentally and physically. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd and you've thought to yourself, man, I wish they talked about anime, man, I wish they talked about manga, guess what? We do! You can check it out at Most Amazing Top 10 Anime. Go give them a sub and let them know I sent ya. Number 9, Black Hand. Black Hand is William Hand, the Herald of Necron. In the Prime Earth continuity, he becomes a Black Lantern again, Ken, who earns his ring after taking his own life, rather than remain as an Indigo Lantern. When the opportunity presents itself, he seeks freedom, taking his own life so that he might rise again as a Black Lantern. After dying, he was resurrected, being offered his own Black Lantern ring, which emerged from his mouth. As a Black Lantern, Black Ken has the power to control dead bodies. He can temporarily revive and animate them, although these people are not really brought back to the living, but more become like thralls under his control or zombies. As a member of the undead as well, Black Hand is almost unkillable. He can regenerate from almost any damage done to him, including having his brain completely fried by Hal Jordan. In the Prime Earth continuity, William Hand was one of the members of the Legion of Doom for a short time. Number 8. Killer Frost number 2. Killer Frost the second is Dr. Louise Lincoln in the New Earth continuity. She was the legacy villain who followed in the footsteps of her former colleague Crystal Frost, the former Killer Frost, who was also a supervillain, like Louise would become. After Crystal died, Louise thought the best way to honor Frost was to repeat the experiment that basically turned Frost into a heat vampire. Seems like a weird way to honor your former colleague. I mean, could have just written, you know, a nice poem or something. But hey, the experiment of course resulted in Lincoln gaining the same powers, turning her into the new Killer Frost. She can in essence freeze her surroundings, eliciting cold wind gusts as well, emanating extremely cold temperatures. And she feeds on heat, which usually cannot harm her but instead fuels her cold-based powers. Number 7. Cheetah. Cheetah is someone we maybe don't think of as being super powerful in the DC universe, but we also need to keep in mind that she is a villain strong enough to take on the likes of one of the Justice League's founding members and members of the Holy Trinity there, Wonder Woman. Cheetah, like many supervillains on this list that you might underestimate, is also a genius, and was actually handpicked to be a member of Lex Luthor's Legion of Doom when he reformed the team during Rebirth. For a time, she even wielded the reforged God Killer sword in addition to her cheetah-like and magic-based abilities and powers, although Barbara Minerva has since given up the blade, returning it to the Amazons. Number 6. Black Adam. Black Adam has to be one of the most powerful members of the Legion of Doom. He is magic-based when it comes to his powers, and packs enough of a punch to rival Shazam, and in some instances also Superman. In fact, because he is magic-based, he sometimes even gets a leg up on fights with Superman. Black Adam has been allied before with the Legion of Doom when he was a formidable and terrifying foe to come across, but he's also been a powerful ally to the Justice League before. In fact, up until recently, he was a prominent member for the Justice League, but Dark Crisis may have caused his allegiances to turn, which makes sense. Something as apocalyptic as Dark Crisis may just require, you know, a darker approach that only the Legion of Doom would be willing to take. Unfortunately, I don't think it panned out too well for them either, but you know, they tried. They're doing their best. Black Adam is ranked a little bit lower on this list, by the way, because we already kind of know, you know, he's super strong, but there are some people that don't think about him, so I still wanted to feature him here. Number 5. Golden Glider. Golden Glider is Lisa Snart, sister to Captain Cold's Leonard Snart, and longtime girlfriend of another fellow Rogues member, Mirror Master. Golden Glider is a pretty cool and underrated character, I think. She never wanted superpowers in the Prime Earth continuity version of her story, but hey, she got them anyway. This happened when the Rogues attempted to merge their weapons with their DNA to basically grant them actual superpowers. The device they were using exploded, and Lisa was caught in that explosion, leaving her physical body comatose, but granting her astral projection powers, which she could use to phase and turn invisible. Number 4. Bizarro. While maybe not the most intelligent traditionally of the lot, Bizarro is still a very powerful foe who deserves his place on this list. Bizarro is basically seen as being the reverse of Superman. For example, while Superman is good and has heat vision, Bizarro is generally bad, a villain, with his own equally powerful cold vision. Depending on the origin and which Bizarro we're talking about, Bizarro is an imperfect clone of Superman created by Lex Luthor. At one point in the Prime Earth continuity, he also possesses a genius-level intellect, which made him even more dangerous, but alas, this was only temporary. Poor Bizarro. Number 3. Heat Wave. Wherever Mick Rory goes, fire generally follows. Mick Rory is Heat Wave, a pyromaniac who also happens to be a genius. A deadly combination. His origin story in the New Earth continuity involved him pretty much killing anyone who ever managed to get close to him as he was growing up by setting them aflame. See what I mean? Flames are literally following him everywhere. Although Mick, of course, was always the person responsible for those flames. When he was just a kid, he set fire to his own family home and was so fascinated by the sight of the flames that instead of running for help, he just watched the house burn. His entire family died in the fire. As Heatwave, Mick has been a member of the Rogues, as well as the Legion of Doom, and is known for building his own heat gun. He also created a substance known as Ultra Steam that was powerful enough to even set fire to the Flash at a cellular level. Number 2. Captain Cold. Captain Cold may sound ridiculous, but he was one of the prominent members of the Legion of Doom way back in its early days. The Legion of Doom actually first appeared not in the comics, but in the animated 1976 cartoon Challenge of the Super Friends. Here, Captain Cold was one of the members featured and acted as an antithesis to the superhero The Flash. Captain Cold is Leonard Snart, and pretty much has always been Leonard Snart, since way back when, during his first appearance, which was in the comics in 1957's Showcase number 8. Captain Cold is so deadly because of his brilliant mind. He is a master engineer, and back in the New Earth continuity, he even made his own cold gun. But in the Prime Earth continuity, despite not making that tech and stealing it, he's still a genius and knows his cold gun inside and out due to taking it apart and putting it back together multiple times to ensure he fully understands every single piece of it. Leonard Snart is severely underrated as a foe, in my opinion. Number 1. Black Manta. Black Manta is definitely a character you could easily underestimate. He is often driven by one purpose: to kill Aquaman. But his drive often knows no limits, and he's not even Atlantean. He's just a guy with a sub and a fancy scuba suit. He's been a member of the Legion of the Doom before, but he was recently pulled back to the Legion after learning during Dark Crisis that Aquaman had died. This evidently defeats a good deal of Manta's purpose in terms of, why he's underwater, why he's around Atlantis, although he had just promised Jackson, his son, he'd always be there for him. Ugh. Black Manta did decide to end up leaving though to serve a greater purpose with the Legion of Doom, which was reformed to fight against those infected by the Dark Crisis. Number 10. Namor. While many folks think of Namor as being an anti-hero, and honestly, he most definitely is, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, he's only really been presented to us as like a straight up villain. Albeit a straight up villain with a pretty powerful and universally relatable motive, I would say. He does what he does in an effort to protect his people and to defend the oceans from those who would pollute and destroy them. AKA, that's us. I think we can all get behind that message. I know I can, as someone that, doesn't want our oceans to bubble and boil and just be filled with garbage. However, Namor's methods honestly could use some work from a heroic standpoint. Namor is presented as being both brutal and cruel when it comes to his actions, which makes him a villain in the MCU. While he is around 100 years old in the comics at this point, his live-action adaptation was made considerably older and is estimated based on his origin to actually be around 500 years old. Woo!
Number 9. Black Adam. Another anti-hero? I promise this won't be a common occurrence. There are two main different origin stories for Black Adam. In the pre-New 52 era of DC, circa 1200 BC, the wizard Shazam became a high priest to the pharaoh Ramses II of Egypt. This is where he met the young prince Teth Adam of Kahndaq. Ramses' son. There we go. Teth Adam impressed the wizard with his fairness and decency, and boom, he was granted the power. But in the more recent continuity, Teth Adam was born in Egypt in the 26th century BCE along the banks of the Nile as part of the Kandaki tribe, and it did not take long for him to be forced into a life of unwilling servitude. Very different. His entire family lost their lives except for his nephew Amon. Amon would save Teth Adam's life, which got him the recognition of the wizard Shazam, who turned Amon into his champion. Amon then shared this power with his uncle Teth Adam, but not seeing eye to eye on how to use the power, Black Adam took his own nephew off of the board and stole the power for himself. This was before he was either banished, stuck in a scarab, or locked away in a tomb, depending on which era you want to talk about. But no matter when we are talking about, Black Adam has been a threat to everyone, and he took on almost the entire world when his family was taken from him back in DC's World War III.
Number 8. Rotath of Lemuria. Rotath of Lemuria is a common example of how magic was presented, often in stories that take place in the Hyborian Age, especially in regards to Conan's story there. He made his first appearance in issue number 37 of Conan the Barbarian from the 1970s, when almost everyone who read comics or otherwise was into the sword and sorcery genre. In this same issue, Rotath was killed by Kull after he was hired by the king of Lemuria, who was frightened of Rotath's power. As he died, Rotath cursed both the king and Kull, casting a spell so that he might return. And so he did. This time in a golden body, but still he ended up being defeated here. This time not by Kull directly, but instead by, well, a giant slug after fighting against Conan and Juma. This is a true story, by the way. Man, I hate when I get defeated by giant slugs.
Ah, slugs, man, they get
Slugs!
you. It's funny because all you need is like a little bit. All you need is like a little bit of table salt.
Yes.
Take that sucker off the board. All right, number 7, Yuga Khan. Yuga Khan is the first ever tyrannical ruler of the planet of Apocalypse, and the father of both Drax, who would become the Infinity Man, and Uxas, who would become Darkseid. Given his nature as essentially a god and one that fathered the current gods, quote unquote, Yuga Khan is certainly ancient, being essentially immortal. As an example, before the fourth world is even fully formed, Yuga Khan alongside his wife Hegra and their sons ruled Apocalypse, creating one of the most feared empires in the entire universe. But being such an astronomically powerful being, it wasn't enough. Yuga Khan was obsessed with becoming the most powerful being in the universe and wanted to be able to essentially control it all. But he was also obsessed with finding out the reason for why it all existed in the first place. So he's a conqueror, but also a philosopher, which is nice. This obsession is what brought him to the Source Wall, getting trapped in it while trying to unravel the mysteries of the Source. All the inhabitants of New Genesis are way stronger, faster, and smarter than humans, being almost all on a level akin to Superman, while also being immortal, but Yuga Khan, he is the most powerful of them all. So much so that after an absolutely colossal effort, Yuga Khan was even able to break free of the Source Wall. That act released energies that could be felt throughout the galaxy and caused the universe itself to shake. He then replenished his power by absorbing the entire life force of the planet Velos and all its inhabitants, and then did the same thing with millions of other worlds while on his way back to Apocalypse. His return to Apocalypse made everyone tremble, including its current ruler, his own son, Darkseid, who he imprisoned in the core of the planet. Most recently though, Yuga Khan was one of the beings empowering Shazam during Darkseid War.
Mine are so Conan. I went really Conan with this
I
list.
respect that though.
I mean, there's lots of old guys, cause
Mine are all like spacey.
yeah, it's so true though. Space is old. Number 6, Kulan Gath. Kulan Gath is probably one of the most iconic villains that Conan the Barbarian has had in the comics. He is so old, in fact, that he also became the enemy of another ancient villain known as the Mutant External, more specifically Selene. Not to be confused with the Eternals, who are their own thing entirely. These are the Externals, not the Eternals. Kulan Gath made his first full feature appearance back in 1972 in the comics in Conan the Barbarian issue number 15.
Number 5, Larfleeze. Larfleeze, or Agent Orange, is one unique character in the emotional spectrum, and that's because he's the sole wielder of the Orange Light of Avarice. He is the only member of the Orange Lantern Corps. Larfleeze is driven by an insatiable greed that grants him dominion over all that he desires, driving him into conflict with whoever possesses what it is that he desires, and over the power of the Orange Lanterns, which represent greed. His power is centered on his ability to conjure constructs using the stolen identity and forms of those he has absorbed into his horde, making him basically an army unto himself. This ability extends even to abstract concepts and beings, showcasing the extent of his control. The big thing about Larfleeze is that since he's spent so much time with his Orange Lantern and ring, he has basically become the Orange Lantern and ring himself. This energy grants him huge levels of power. His constructs are virtually indestructible and can overwhelm even the most powerful opponents. However, Larfleeze's power comes at the cost of his individuality, as his insatiable greed makes him less of a person and more of a living embodiment of greed itself. Even without the power of the Orange Lanterns though, his race is already basically immortal, with Larfleeze himself being billions of years old, and with enough power that I seriously doubt he'll be going down anytime soon.
Number 4, Thulsa Doom. When it comes to Conan, he definitely has a type when it comes to some of his greatest enemies. Typically, he's caught in the midst of epic battles against evil sorcerers or wizards. In Thulsa Doom's case, his brand of evil magic user is Necromancer. While Thulsa Doom became a famous Conan villain thanks to his appearance as the main antagonist in the 1982 Conan the Barbarian movie, he initially started out as a villain for what some consider to be a more nuanced barbarian hero also created by Robert E. Howard, Kull of Atlantis, or Kull the Conqueror, as he was also known.
Number 3, Shumagorath. Yes, it is a giant tentacled eyeball, but hold off on the laughter because Shumagorath the Destroyer, the Conqueror of Midnight, the All-Killer of the Dawn, is a ridiculously ancient being and greatest of the old gods, or the many-angled ones. Among his many powers is the ability to communicate with and control others nearby and across entire dimensions. He can create and direct powerful blasts of mystical energy and affect transmutations on a planetary scale. His skin alone is difficult to damage even with the most powerful of magics. While his form seems pretty silly, cause it is, it's actually only a shell containing his power, and he can alter this appearance however he sees fit. This is actually because it's not even his true form. His true form is apparently not even comprehensible to us humans. Boo. Shumagorath can destroy multiple galaxies solely through his aura pressure, and this old god has also the ability to destroy entire realities. He is the most powerful in his home dimension, just like others of his kind, and only part of his power has actually appeared on Earth. And with the stuff he has done with that fraction of power, that should tell you just how powerful he is.
Number 2, Skrulls. All of them. There's many. They're not all bad, but they started bad. That's right, Skrulls are some of the oldest villains around, although they aren't exactly considered clean-cut villains anymore. In fact, some Skrulls have even become better known as heroes in recent years. Originally though, Skrulls appeared as a villainous alien race in Fantastic Four Volume 1, Issue number 2, and who were focused solely, during their appearance, on basically conquering Earth. This was right after the FF team had been introduced in the previous issue, which was basically all Issue 1 was really about, the team's origin story. The Skrulls knew that the FF were the main protectors of Earth, at this point anyways, despite the fact that they had just sorta, started their superhero careers, which is pretty crazy. Knowing this, the Skrulls decided to pose as the FF and commit a bunch of villainous deeds while impersonating them, hoping to discredit the Fantastic Four to the point that the US military would capture and then kill the Fantastic team. With the Fantastic Four disposed of, the Earth would then be ripe for the Skrulls' taking. Of course, this plan was foiled as the FF trapped the imposters and ended up posing as them, taking the Skrulls' idea but executing it much better. Disguised as the Skrulls, the FF would tell the Skrull leader that Earth's defenses were too powerful for the invasion to succeed, causing them to just call off the invasion. The Skrulls that originally posed as the Fantastic Four members were forced to stay behind after the invasion left, taking the form of cows and living in apparent peace, as they apparently really enjoyed living as cows. Skrulls themselves can live hundreds of years, and their empire has existed for tens of millions of years, which means those cows are gonna be really, really old.
Can you imagine you're like millions of years old conquerors, and then you go to the planet, you make all your all the way there, and then someone's like, you know what, I think it's gonna be too hard, and you're just like, you're right, let's just go.
You're right.
You're right, we should just go.
And then those guys are just like, why don't we just be cows?
And
that's your life.
Moo. Number 1, the Great Darkness. You can't get much more ancient than existing before creation itself. The Great Darkness was the literal darkness and nothingness that existed before the Presence ever came to be. When the Presence, aka God in DC Comics, said, "Let there be light," the Great Darkness is the one who went into hiding. At some point, a clan known as the Brujeria, I believe is how you pronounce it, attempted a ritual to reawaken the Great Darkness in order to destroy God and reshape the universe. Instead of being completely evil though, this was more like an animal who was confused and didn't understand its power or what its purpose even was in the universe. The Great Darkness, also sometimes referred to as the Great Evil Beast, went on a warpath, easily defeating many heroes and waging a solo assault on heaven itself, decimating everything in its way to demand answers from the Presence. It even caused the 3 main figures of Hell to form a union with each other just in case something went wrong. When the Great Darkness reached heaven though, it met Swamp Thing of all people, who taught it the concept of good and evil, explaining that one couldn't survive without the other. The darkness then reached up and God reached back, and they became one and the same as like yin and yang, or as a balance. Recently though, the Great Darkness played a large role in the Dark Crisis event. It's basically the overarching villain of the entire DC multiverse, but also just kind of force of nature doing its thing.
At number 10 is Brainiac 13. Brainiac 13 is a rendition of the original Brainiac that catapulted the character's might to unprecedented heights. Armed with advanced tech, Brainiac 13 orchestrated a jaw-dropping transformation of Metropolis, catapulting it eons ahead to the 64th century standard. But that was merely the prelude to his audacious exploits. Amidst the cataclysmic Impurex War, Brainiac 13 embarked on a daring gambit, pitting himself against the cosmic might of Impurex, a confrontation that saw him ascend to newfound power. The consequences were dire as his actions teetered on the brink of disseminating Earth, and the ominous realm of Apocalypse. Twist in his machinations revealed his bid to ensnare Kal-El eternally within a counterfeit Krypton. Brainiac 13's narrative arc stands as a testament to the boundless ingenuity of comic book storytelling, a captivating dance between unfettered power and the ceaseless resilience of iconic heroes. If you're enjoying the video so far, please support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. And by the way, many of the entries from this list are from your very own suggestions, so if you have any more, drop them down below. At number 9 is my personal favorite, Abracadabra. Imagine a world where science has brushed away the mystical curtains of stage magic, rendering it obsolete. Yet in this brave new era, Citizen Abra emerges, an enigmatic figure hailing from the 64th century. Unveiling a longing for the art of performance, Abra crafts a time machine and goes back in time to when magic held an entertaining allure. Abra's audacious escapades escalate as he crosses paths with none other than the Flash himself, Barry Allen. Armed with a mesmerizing contraption that compels applause, Abra bends audiences to his will, eliciting ovation even for the most lackluster of feats. Unfazed by the audience's indifference, he embarks on a new venture, entangling himself in pivotal historical junctures. At number 8 is Professor Zoom. Meet Eobard Thawne, the temporal troublemaker known as Professor Zoom from the world of the Flash. This sinister speedster, hailing from the 25th century, isn't your typical Roadrunner. Thawne is powered by the enigmatic negative speed force, granting him a whole arsenal of abilities. He's not just about dashing through time and dimensions, because his super speed isn't just a speed thing, because it's also a strength thing. Imagine facing a foe who combines the velocity of a bullet train with the brawn of a freight locomotive. That's basically Professor Zoom for you. But his powers go beyond the Fast and Furious. He's a molecular magician, letting him weave through solid objects like a ghostly apparition. And villain though he may be, in one universe iteration, he became the universe's last hope by manipulating matter itself. So while Professor Zoom might be a bane to the Flash, he's a prime example of how a speedster's potential can go far beyond the finish line. At number 7 is Fitzroy, with one of the most OP superpowers a mutant could have. Born in the same dystopian future as Bishop, Fitzroy's lineage is intertwined with the elite Hellfire Club. His mutant abilities are nothing short of intriguing. With crystalline hands, he can siphon the life force from any living being, converting their life energy for his own use. This lethal power disintegrates his victims, leaving a haunting mark. But that's not all, as Fitzroy's powers extend into the very fabric of time. By channeling the energy he absorbed from his enemies, he can forge temporal wormholes, essentially bridges across time and space. Yet, as I mentioned, these portals come at a cost. He must drain life force, with one's life traded for a passage through time. This is actually how Bishop himself was initially sent back in time to the modern era. Fitzroy's role as Bishop's main adversary adds to the riveting layer to the chronicles of the mutant world. At number 6 is Nimrod. Now what might sound like a whimsical monitor carries a weighty resonance among X-Men enthusiasts. Despite its North American connotation of incompetence, Nimrod packs a literary punch, symbolizing a deft hunter. And let me tell you, that's precisely the association Nimrod has conjured. Enter the Nimrod of Days of Future Past, rooted in Earth 811, an incarnation of the Sentinel program. This mechanical marvel journeyed back in temporal torrents, fixated on obliterating our beloved mutants. But hold on to your cerebro, folks, because in the entangled narratives of Powers of X, a glimmer of a revelation emerges. Nimrod, our nimble hunter, holds the dystopian potential to thread the fabric of humanity and mutant kind's fate, where humans unwittingly serve as instruments in a symphony of mutant destruction, in a future where mutants teeter on the precipice of oblivion. At number 5 is Tommy Tracer. This is a lesser known villain existing in the modern era who you would have only met if you read the super weird Spider-Man The Other series. This guy, if you can call him a guy because he's eventually revealed to be a robot, has the power to hack into and control anything with a computer chip. From traffic lights to nuclear launch sites, Tracer's got access. Additionally, the self-described machine god also has neat little bullets that relentlessly track onto a locked-on target, stopping only when Spidey literally turns and catches them. For as cool as this villain is, his role in the other comic is, well, minimal to say the least. But so was about everybody else in that series. Not to hate, I'm just spitting facts. At number 4 is Kronos. David Clinton, stepping onto the pages of DC Comics with Atom issue 3, emerges as a thorn in Ray Palmer's side. A life of crime led him to a prison cell where he found himself with an abundance of time to ponder his misdeeds. Yet instead of remorse, he became captivated by timepieces. Tick by tick, he honed his knowledge of clocks, gears, and the mechanics of time itself. And when the cell doors finally swung open, he emerged as Kronos, a time-traveling villain armed with with unique devices. An exploding hourglass, a wicked wristwatch, and even a contraption that could slow down time itself, all at his fingertips. His criminal exploits span the DC animated universe as he plundered history's treasures. Yet when our heroes intervened, he sought to escape through temporal vortexes, trailed by the likes of Green Lantern, Batman, and Wonder Woman. Kronos is a figure who once reflected on time, ultimately became its master, weaving a narrative where past and present collided in a whirlwind of intrigue and theft. At number 3 is Nathaniel Richards. What if the smartest man alive was evil? Now, don't get too worried. While Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four may not be evil, his half-brother's future descendant definitely is. Also known as Iron Lad, Immortus, Scarlet Centurion, Rama-Tut, Mr. Griffin, Dr. Doom, Kid Immortus, Saint Nathaniel, He Who Remains, and finally Kang the Conqueror, he's a descendant in the Richard Reed's family tree. He's one of the most convoluted characters in comic book history due to his numerous alternate timeline versions. And he's also possibly the greatest threat to the Marvel multiverse, with genius intellect matching that of Reed Richards. Brains are all this guy has, no superhuman powers necessary for multiversal domination. He invented time travel, enabling him to wield any tool or being across time for absolute conquest. Kang's complexity and unprecedented control over time make him a villain of unparalleled proportions, a chronicle conqueror standing on the precipice of endless possibilities. At number 2 is the Time Trapper. Trap as in to hunt, not the music genre. I feel like I have to make that decision. Legion's superhero arch-nemesis emerges as a warlord at Time's End. Despite loathing the Legion, this paradoxical figure ironically engineered their genesis to combat his foe, Mordu. Mordu's notorious Iron Curtain of Time prevents temporal exploration, fueling conjecture about his true identity. Brainiac number 5 speculated that Trapper was not just a person, but a sentient timeline in rebellion. What sets this entity apart is its mastery over Time's current. It erects impenetrable iron curtains, halting time travelers, and even Age's chosen targets, turning them into bone or ash. Even more astounding is it fragments time, forging independent pocket realms. Most astonishingly, one pocket universe retained only Earth and Krypton, expunging forces like the New Gods and the Guardians of the Universe. The Time Trapper manipulates time's tapestry with chilling finesse, weaving a web of chronal power that captivates the minds of Legion and theorists alike. At number 1 is Superior Iron Man, who is in fact a villain in this alternate timeline. A version of Tony Stark that's like the mirror universe reflection of our beloved genius inventor. This intriguing alter ego emerged after the Axis event, a storyline that flipped the moral compasses of heroes and villains. Tony, usually a poster child for heroism, found himself on the other side of the spectrum. And what a ride it was. And he didn't completely revert to his old self after the event, cleverly maintaining his wicked alignment in secret. Imagine this, Tony the charismatic villain pushing his tech agenda by releasing a subscription service app tied to the new Extremis virus, allowing people to change their appearance at will, for a price of course. But fear not, cosmic enthusiasts, because Superior Iron Man was a limited phase. The hero within couldn't stay suppressed, and after a tumultuous Secret Wars event in 2015, Tony Stark was back to his virtuous self.
In a 10 Rainbow Raider. The reason that all the good guys are good is because of their morals. Because they channel their anger into something positive, because they can control themselves. But what happens when a hero with powers like Superman is filled with a red-hot rage? Well, we saw it in Injustice. But someone able to cause those emotions, that person being Rainbow Raider, makes them pretty damn powerful. Rainbow Raider's power is derived entirely from their special goggles, okay? Which allows him to project solid beams of rainbow-colored light that he can either use offensively or as a slide for travel, and he can also coat people in certain colors of light to induce emotions, like blue for sadness, red for anger. There's also the Rainbow Raiders, a team of super color-themed villains that also have powers based on the color of the rainbow. However, just the ability to induce emotion by covering someone in light is enough to make Roy G. Bivolo pretty damn powerful. If all my rage came out and I had super speed, damn, people would have to like hide in fear, but it wouldn't matter because I would find them. And at 9, Zoom. I included a CW character on this list specifically for the guy in my DMs who told me to stop doing it. The CW version of Zoom was not exactly what everyone was expecting, although you have to admit he is one of the best and scariest villains in the Arrowverse to date. The sheer demonic look he had, especially with the suit, shook even me. However, thanks to the Velocity 9 that he was taking, Hunter Zolomon was incredibly fast, the fastest we had ever seen at that point. So fast even that in order to fight him, Barry had to take speed out of the equation. And during the final fight, Barry had to create a time remnant because he wasn't fast enough to stop Zoom with only one of him. It only got worse after Zoom kidnapped Wally and Barry had to give Zoom his speed in order to get Wally back. This only made Zoom faster. It gets even worse when in the final fight, the Time Wraiths come out of the Speed Force and take Zoom, which changes him into the Black Flash, and then he gets supercharged by the Speed Force to become the living embodiment of death for all speedsters. Plus, I mean, this guy was able to create breaches at will to bring hundreds of metahumans over to Earth 1. That's pretty damn impressive. And at 8, Johnny Quick. Johnny Allen, alias Johnny Quick, is a criminal speedster from Earth 3. Together with his girlfriend and partner in crime Atomica, he was a member of the crime syndicate. Johnny Allen was a high-profile criminal on the run with his equally criminal girlfriend. Cornered on the roof of Central City's Star Labs, Allen was struck by a bolt of lightning which shattered the roof. The duo fell into the lab space below, with Allen landing amid the chemicals that gave, presumably, Earth 1 Barry his speed. Something in this incident, probably the chemicals, granted him his super speed, and he went on to become a super criminal alongside his girlfriend, who had also been given powers. While his girlfriend took on the name Atomica, he took on the name Johnny Quick. The couple joined the crime syndicate at some point after this, and they ran through Central City, answering to no one, until one day the White House burned, around the time of Darkseid's incursion onto Earth Prime. The being that had destroyed Ultraman's Krypton came to Earth, and an alliance of supercriminals formed to find a way to safety. So yeah, it's basically just Barry Allen, but Earth 3. I say that's pretty overpowered. And at 7, Weather Wizard. Meteorological madman known as the Weather Wizard was a menace to both Barry Allen and Wally West's Flash, and one of the most overpowered supercriminals they've ever faced. First appearing in 1959's The Flash number 110, criminal Mark Martin armed himself with the Weather Wand, an advanced piece of technology which could control like atoms in the universe, some form of energy, okay? Martin took the wand from his deceased brother, a scientist who never intended it to leave his lab. With some modifications, it became a deadly weapon for the criminal, and at full power, the wand could summon lightning storms, rain clouds, or change the weather entirely. Whatever the weather was, Martin could use his mighty powers to rob banks and cause mass panic. A later reimagining of the Weather Wizard would see him instead granted the metahuman ability to control the elements without using the wand. And the Weather Wizard also appeared in the CW's Flash TV show as one of the many metahumans created by the particle accelerator explosion which gave Barry Allen his powers. However, on the show there are 2 versions, one of them appearing in the first episode which Joe West killed, and the second appearing in the 16th episode of that season, with the second one being the first's older brother, the Martin brothers, Clyde being the first one, and Mark being the second, and the proper Weather Wizard. As Cisco said, he's been waiting to use that name since day 1. And at 6, Gorilla Grodd. Gorilla Grodd is a Flash rogue from Africa's Gorilla City. The original Grodd, which debuted in DC Comics in 1959, was a telepath who could control other animals and also had a form of mind control as well over humans. In the New 52, all inhabitants of Gorilla City had accelerated mental attributes due to the Speed Force, but Grodd was still the superior member of the species. On The Flash and the CW, Grodd was a very intelligent gorilla experimented on at Star Labs to try and create a super soldier for the US government. However, the torture and unethical treatment of the gorilla caused him to grow angry and evil, and he escaped seeking vengeance. Grodd had powerful mind control powers on top of superhuman strength and enhanced intellect, and at one point even combined with the Flash to be a psychopathic, telepathic gorilla with super speed. So I think it's safe to say that we should all be scared of Gorilla Grodd. Plus, his pop figure is pretty damn cool. Halfway through into number 5, Savitar. The fact that Barry Allen was able to just beat this whole Savitar thing from The Flash Season 3 will always escape me. I won't really ever understand how they actually ended up defeating a literal version of Barry from the future. Like, I get how they managed to do it, but it was still incredibly unrealistic, since technically Savitar would have known beforehand that the timeline was changing, since technically that should, in my brain, at least be how time travel works, but this ended up being how it works in the show, so that's fine, I guess. I don't see how it ever would have been possible to defeat a future version of the Flash without this though, but I know that he couldn't really die, since if he died, Savitar wouldn't be able to happen. A future version of the Flash is always going to be mega OP, okay? I said it. In at 4, Mirror Master. While Mirror Master never seemed like much more than a B-grade supervillain in Flash's Rogues Gallery, his power has made him so much more. Before he became a Flash version, the second Mirror Master, Evan McCulloch, was an assassin in Scotland and was already a formidable foe. However, once he got his mirror gun, he became insanely powerful. The mirror gun gives Mirror Master the ability to travel to an alternate dimension by entering and exiting any reflective surface. On top of being a significant pain in the Flash's side, Mirror Master has also fought Animal Man and was someone that gave him all he could handle. The CW used the Sam Scudder version, and he was only a minor villain, and then they kinda did Eva McCulloch for season 7, but honestly, even Sam being able to travel through mirrors like that, trapping the Flash in the mirror dimension for a time, this guy is certainly underestimated. Although I hope that they find a way to explore maybe some of his abilities in later comics or even the show. I'd like to see that. Getting close to the end, in number 3, the Shade. This Golden Age Flash foe is one of the most powerful and most terrifying, but he isn't always on the side of evil, luckily. First appearing in Flash Comics number 33 from 1942, this immortal conduit for dark energy was a formidable enemy for Jay Garrick and often caused problems, the speedster, with his weaponized shadows. Kind of like my demons, causing me all kinds of problems as well. Initially depicted as a common criminal for the Flash to stop from robbing banks and menacing Keystone City in the 40s, the Shade was eventually reimagined as something much more sinister. Originally possessing a magic cane allowing him to control darkness, the revamped 90s Shade was given a real identity of Richard Swift and an endless supply of supernatural abilities. Returning to Menace, the hero Starman, and eventually becoming his ally, the Shade used his powers of shadow manipulation, time travel, teleportation, and intangibility for both good and evil. The Shade also had his own dimension, the Shadowlands, where unwitting enemies would become trapped. And I think that having his own dimension earns him a spot in the top 3. Just saying. Penultimately, in at number 2, Red Death. Red Death is a speedster that is an evil combination of Batman and the Flash, which already sounds terrifying. Wait until you hear the story. The Bruce Wayne of Earth 52 started off fighting crime with Robin, but because, you know, of course, Robins kept dying left, right, and center. So, understandably, Batman got darker and darker, becoming more extreme with his methods. He started killing people, which honestly seems more realistic to me, aside from just like being done fighting crime totally, which can't happen, otherwise they wouldn't have a story, right? This eventually leads him to Barry, who refuses to give Bruce his Speed Force powers, understandably because again, this time Batman's a psycho. So, Batman, using the various rogues' weapons to fight Barry, knocks him out. Once Barry was unconscious, Bruce tied him to the front of a cosmic treadmill modified Batmobile, I don't know how the hell he did that, and then drives them both into the Speed Force. Again, I don't know how that happened or works logically, but okay. You do you, Bat Marty, we gotta get back to the future, your kids are in danger. When entering the Speed Force, Barry and Bruce, again, somehow ended up fusing together into an evil Batman with super speed and a lust for killing. And while Barry's mind was trapped inside Bruce's body, so he could just watch. He then gets a visit from the Batman Who Laughs, who was part of the Dark Knights and whose goal was conquering the multiverse, and since he was a version of Batman who was psycho, he was like, hey you, come here, come with me, we're the same kind of. And finally, in number 1, Black Lantern Reverse Flash. The Black Lantern Corps is a group of various dead superheroes and villains alike who were raised by Necron and each given a Black Lantern ring. This ring grants them power over death, and these rings are powered by the Anti-Monitor, as he is present within the Black Lantern power battery. Those raised by the Black Lantern ring are in essence resurrected to where they were before death, but their mind is warped to serve Necron's purpose. Now they aren't really like fully resurrected, but that's kind of like the best analogy that we have. Those with the ring have various powers including a healing factor, aura recognition, which allows them to see powerful emotions, energy spectrum assimilation, which lets them extract the hearts of individuals they've slain, and use their last feelings to charge the central battery and their ring by 0.01%, because you know, that's a lot, it's worth it. And they, much like zombies, can infect others by biting them. A bite from a Black Lantern will slowly kill the one bitten, and then turn them into a Black Lantern upon death. Yeah, basically zombies with superpowers, so definitely not something to laugh at, especially when it's the man who killed Barry Allen's mother for the fun of it.
In at number 10 though is Red Hulk. Red Hulk may not have been a member of the regular Thunderbolts team, but he actually led his very own Thunderbolts team, so I'm including him here. And one other member from that team on this list. As most people know, Red Hulk is, well, a Hulk, meaning he has insane levels of super strength and durability that has allowed him to do things like overpowering and killing the Abomination with ease, punching out the Watcher, taking down an Elder of the Universe, and defeating an Odin Force-powered Thor in a one-on-one fight, though it should be noted that Thor was unprepared for him at the time. But what some might not know is his other two abilities. Red Hulk constantly gives off gamma radiation, which increases the angrier he gets, even sometimes making him appear to be on fire. And if he gets too angry, he can even explode in gamma fire. But Ross can also absorb energy, mostly gamma, but he apparently has a real taste for cosmic power. He has also absorbed and taken the Silver Surfer's power cosmic, flying away on his surfboard. Cowabunga, dude. Number 9. Moonstone. Carla Sofin was a not-so-moral psychiatrist who particularly enjoyed manipulating her patients into paranoia rather than helping them. So we're off to a good start here. This led to her being an assistant of the villain Dr. Faustus, and her manipulative skills only grew under his teachings. This allowed her to get time with Lloyd Bloch, who is the original Moonstone. She gave Lloyd hallucinogens and persuaded him into giving her the Moonstone and the Kree device that granted him immense powers, which include 10-ton superhuman strength, super speed, stamina, durability, agility, reflexes, and flight, as well as, thanks to the Gravity Stone, the ability to control gravitational forces, enabling her to move and otherwise manipulate matter, to create force fields, to increase gravity around a target and crush it, to generate miniature black holes, and even to transport objects through dimensional rifts. Number 8. Songbird. Melissa Gold, who goes by the superhero alias Songbird, is a human mutate with vocal cord based sound abilities that were later replaced by a set of vocal cord implants and an external harness thanks to Roxxon. Now this allowed her to do a whole bunch of really cool science fiction-y things like generating powerful sonic blasts, sonic force fields, influencing others with high-pitched sonic vibrations, and she can even create solid objects from sound, including battering rams, pincers, projectiles, giant hands, platforms, and wings that she can use to fly at supersonic speeds. The process that granted her these crazy powers also happened to give her super strength, capable of lifting 2 tons, and of course, she has the other basics like durability, stamina, reflexes, agility, and speed. What do you think of this? Kinda nuts. And at number 7 is America Chavez. While I feel as though a lot of people do really like America Chavez, I feel like a lot of people are not fully aware of her powers and just how awesome they can be. America has the physiology of an extra-dimensional being, which gives her the ability to channel interdimensional energies through her body. She's used these energies in a number of different ways and never to their peak extent. So some of these powers she has displayed using these energies include self-propelled flight, superhuman speed, and superhuman strength that nearly allowed her to beat Loki in a fight. She is nearly indestructible and invulnerable, possesses superhuman longevity, hyper-cosmic awareness, and her signature move, the star-shaped portals that enable her to traverse time and the multiverse. She can also use them offensively as a spatial slicer, and the portals even allow her to access the Starling Highway. She's truly a powerhouse. Number 6, Persuasion. Persuasion is Kara Kilgrave, the daughter of Zebediah Kilgrave, otherwise known as the Purple Man. Similar to her father, Persuasion earns that name with the ability to release pheromones that can place people into an extremely susceptible state that puts them at Kara's every command. The difference between her and her father, though, is that when Kara is persuading someone and using her abilities, they also turn the same shade of purple as her, which means it would be very hard for her to use her abilities with any form of subtlety. Her abilities also don't work on symbiotes or their current hosts, so there's that as well. Sorry girl, you are cool, but your dad, he's kinda cooler. Whoops. Number 5, Penance, Speedball. Once Robert Baldwin, also known as Speedball, discovered his powers were still working after the Stanford incident, his powers evolved and he ordered a new, very metal-looking suit with 612 internal spikes that constantly caused him pain for the 612 lives that were lost in Stamford, Connecticut. He joined the new Thunderbolts team with his ability to create a kinetic field of unknown energy around himself, which absorbed all kinetic energy directed against him. With his kinetic field, it was nearly impossible for him to be hurt, and he instead bounced around harmlessly from object to object with no loss or transference of momentum. But as penance, with this new cool suit, Robbie's powers evolved, allowing him to absorb energy from his surroundings such as kinetic activity, electricity, and the radiation signatures of other super beings, which was then harnessed as kinetic release, causing explosive force to radiate from his body, firing lance beams of pure force from his hands, or even allowing him to fly. Penance initially required physical pain in order to activate these powers, hence the spikes and the name. And his bubble field powers appeared to be gone, but Doc Samson later showed Robbie that his powers were actually affected by his mindset, and he could reactivate his Speedball powers with relaxed, positive thinking. Number 4. Atlas. On a delivery to South America, American soldier and mercenary Eric Jostin was mutated by Amora the Enchantress using Baron Zemo's ionic ray, infusing him with ionic energy. He took on a few different names as a villain, including Power Man, Smuggler, and Goliath, after using Pym particles to further enhance himself, but trying to become a hero, he joined the Thunderbolts and took on the name Atlas. But enough backstory. What powers did this ionic energy give Eric? Well, he can channel the energy into strength capable of lifting 30 tons, but thanks to the Pym particles, he can grow in size, increasing his strength to an almost immeasurable amount. He has limitless stamina, invulnerability, and increased perception and reflexes. But the interesting part of Atlas comes when he is in his energy form. In this form, Atlas is capable of adaptive possession, which he did with his old lover Dallas, self-propelled flight, energy manipulation and phasing, self-sustenance and immortality, as well as pan-dimensional phasing and the creation of breaches that act as doorways between the 616 universe and the microverse. Number 3. Lady Deathstrike. Yuriko Oyama is the daughter of Kenji Oyama, who eventually becomes Lord Darkwind and develops a way to use adamantium to enhance individuals, which was stolen by William Stryker. Yuriko did not like her father that much, and with the help of Daredevil, actually ended him. This inadvertently caused the loss of her lover though, which twisted her into taking after her father and enacting a vendetta against Wolverine for his adamantium skeleton that was given to him by the process stolen from Lord Darkwind. Yuriko took on the name Lady Deathstrike, and she also enhanced herself with adamantium claws and a cyborg body. Almost every single thing she does is in service of her vendetta against Wolverine, except for the Thunderbolts, which is a team she was just kinda on, even though Bullseye, who she also hated, was on that team as well. Her 12-inch long claws, much like her cybernetic skeleton, are laced with adamantium and enable her to cut and pierce through pretty much any substance. Her physical attributes are also enhanced, and she possesses a cybernetic healing factor and even the ability to cybernetically interface her consciousness with external computer systems. In at number 2 is Mongoose. Okay, are you ready to be alarmed? Mongoose, as his name might suggest, and as I never imagined would be true, actually started life as a legit mongoose. The change came when he was experimented on by the High Evolutionary. This experimentation that created the New Men turned the mongoose into a sentient humanoid being who retains some of his animalistic qualities. Like all mongoose, or mongoose, no, it's mongoose. This character can lift 10 tons, run fast enough to scale buildings, physically exert himself for 24 hours straight, sustain strikes from Spider-Man and Thor, and he has enhanced agility and reflexes, just like all mongoose. I guess. He can also use his teeth and claws as weapons alongside his gauntlets that produce a paralyzing gas. To my surprise, while he has pretty much no training, he has developed his own fighting style that is apparently similar to Spider-Man's. Number 1. King Cobra. In a world where a highly radioactive super spider can allow a young man to do all the things a spider can, like apparently swinging from building to building and being incredibly acrobatic, of course there is someone who had the same thing happen but with a cobra instead. Klaus Voorhees was an ex-convict working with the medical research professor Ezekiel Schechter on a universal antitoxin for snake venom. Now Voorhees induced one of the cobras kept in the laboratory to bite both Schechter and himself, planning to use the universal antitoxin to save himself from death. But what he didn't know is that the cobra had been irradiated, so the combination of the radioactive venom and the experimental antitoxin gave Voorhees cobra-like powers, which is apparently elasticity for some reason. All of the bones in his body, including his skull, are malleable, and his muscles are also extremely resilient, making his body and bones basically impossible to break. He can control every muscle in his body to slither at around 50 miles per hour without his arms or his legs, able to slither into and out of very tight and small spaces down to about 4 inches in diameter. Also, by using his flexibility to wrap himself around a victim's body and then exerting his full strength, the cobra traps that victim within his cobra grip, which is exceedingly difficult to escape.
And 10. Birthday Boy. Ray Salinger was a serial killer who operated in Gotham under the alias Birthday Boy, and he was actually the first costumed criminal encountered by Batman in his crime-fighting career. Introduced in Batman Earth 1 Volume 1 in June 2012, Birthday Boy is fascinated by young girls resembling his first kill. When in his killer mode, he wears a burlap sack with holes cut out for the eyes and a birthday party hat, usually in a room decorated like a birthday party. As a calling card, he left birthday candles where he stole away his victims and told his victims to make a wish that was decorated with the words "Happy Birthday Amanda," which is only creepier since we have Amanda here. And I feel like this guy is a representation of all of her DMs. That's right, I'm calling all of you nerds out. I think the sickest part of this character though was when he first started the whole Birthday Boy thing. He had been hired by Mayor Oswald Cobblepot to eliminate various enemies. In return, he was given girls from the streets or enemies of the Penguin as a reward. And at 9, Professor Pig. Professor Pig originally debuted in the alternate reality story of Batman number 666, which I love. He also debuted as a corpse, which I love even more. However, he was introduced as a recurring character in 2009 in Batman and Robin number 1. In Batman Reborn, Laszlo Valentine was an extreme circus mob boss until something turned him into Professor Pig, leading him to begin funding his scientific experiments by selling narcotics to the criminal underworld. All in all, he's an extremely disturbing villain, and that makes me think about why people aren't afraid of pigs as much as they are clowns, because if you ask me, this guy is freaking horrifying, okay? Professor Pig, if you couldn't tell, actually wears a pig mask, along with a butcher's apron, and what at times appears to be some form of hastily thrown together surgical outfit, like he got it from like Wish. Or he got it from like Party City. It's freaking weird. Also ends up brainwashing and controlling various people who he calls his Dolotrons. Like, I don't know what else there is to do other than just run away, so I'm gonna move on now. Although next time I have a pet pig in Minecraft, I know what I'm naming him. And at 8, Bootface. Okay, this guy's origin is the reason I wanted to talk about him. This guy's origin was simply him getting kicked in the face by Batman, and that's it, I'm not even kidding. Bootface was a thug working for Terminus. He got his name because of a boot imprint embedded into his face, which, like I said, is from Batman. Bootface first appeared in Batman and Robin Volume 2, number 10 from 2012, and honestly, it's one of the most interesting origins I've ever seen. And I mean this completely seriously. Everyone else has like a parent die, or was living in poverty, or was being abused. This dude just got kicked in the face and got so mad about it he became a supervillain. Even if he wasn't really like a good person beforehand, I mean, like, he was a thug and basically still is, but like still, just this time he has a ridiculous name to go with it, but hey, I still love it. And a man who is fueled by pure rage because he was permanently scarred by his attacker that ends up being a superhero, that's good enough for me. That's so funny. Bootface. And at 7, Mirror Man. Lloyd Ventures is a criminal who was detained in Gotham State Penitentiary. Using broken mirror shards, he distracts the guards long enough to escape from prison. Inspired by mirrors, I guess somehow, he becomes Mirror Man. Upon creating a machine that would enable him to see through objects, Mirror Man began targeting Batman so that he could find out his secret identity. identity. He literally discovers Batman's identity as Bruce Wayne by using a X-ray mirror, which is freaking nuts. Like, what even is that? How is that a thing? Mirror Man actually gets sent to prison before he can reveal the identity though, but because they want conflict, of course, he manages to escape with a plan to reveal Bruce's identity to the world, only foiled when Alfred, dressed as Batman, interrupts a press conference that Bruce Wayne was hosting, instantly disproving the fact that Batman is Bruce Wayne, because you saw them both in the same room. Even though that obviously Batman is partners. I don't know why people believe that. The public should have seen through this, okay? The people in Gotham City are dumber than we thought. I mean, they had Condiment King, so I guess they are dumb. Speaking of which, in its 6th, Condiment King. The Condiment King, created by Bruce Timm and Paul Dini for Batman the Animated Series, is a villain who makes use of various condiments, sometimes capable of causing anaphylactic shock. And his weapons are literally like those squeeze tubes for like ketchup and mustard, just on guns. It's hilarious. He's generally used as comic relief within the series, but still. He would make many condiment-based puns. For example, the big bad bat guy, I knew you'd catch up to me sooner. How I relished this meeting. You, the dynamic Dark Knight, versus me, the conceptual Condiment King. Come, Batman, let's see if you can cut the mustard. The Condiment King is seemingly killed after being betrayed and bludgeoned by the Human Flame with his own ketchup and mustard guns in the miniseries Final Crisis Aftermath Run, which is a comic book, which already shows how he can actually be deadly aside from the whole anaphylactic shock thing. And that's again not taking into account any potential allergic reactions that he can trigger or blindness. I mean, ketchup and mustard are very acidic and can cause some serious damage if left unchecked. It just goes right into the eyes, you know? Plus, what if you have fries and he gives you mustard, okay? The only appropriate punishment for that is death. Halfway through into number 5, Joker's daughter. Unfortunately, it's not the Joker's biological daughter. That would have been an interesting story. This is just a girl who finds Joker's face, stitches it onto hers, and then goes berserk. So honestly, it could very well be his biological daughter. The only person that I think would commit such an atrocious act is in fact the Joker, so who knows? While maybe not being as prolific or accomplished as the Joker, Joker's daughter is definitely insane enough for this list. Even if I'm pretty sure a lot of people know she exists and not many people underestimate her, but hey, look, even if one person underestimates her and they watch this video, boom, it's enough. It counts, okay? Not to mention the fact that she also went by Catgirl, Scarecrow, Riddler's daughter, Penguin's daughter, Cardqueed, and Harley Quinn. Each incarnation also calling herself the respected super person's daughter, which I have to say is going to make a family reunion real awkward. But in actuality, she ended up being Dwella Dent, Two-Face's daughter, apparently, which is seemingly BS in my opinion, but we love a girl with a little flair, you know? And that flair will cause her to ruin Gotham City. In it for Clock King. Born William Talkman, Clock King spends his early years taking care of his invalid sister. One day he finds out from a doctor that he himself only has 6 months to live. Great. Despairing for his sister's future, he watches the timing of a local bank's vault in order to rob it, hoping that the money would provide for his sister after he was gone. His caper would have gone on successfully had he not tripped the silent alarm and been caught by the Green Arrow. The Clock King then goes on to join Major Disasters in Justice League, which becomes the Justice League Antarctica. This JLA includes G-Nort, who ends up saving the lives of the entire team. The original Clock King had no metahuman powers or abilities, although he is athletic and extraordinarily smart. He extensively uses clocks and time-related gimmicks to devastating effect. His primary weapon is a sword forged into the shape of a clock's hand that also doubles as a walking stick. And his skill in swordsmanship is such that even Batman himself could not defeat him in single combat. So watch out for Clock King. Getting close to the end of number 3, the Calculator. While the Calculator now seems to be an oracle of sorts for supervillains, the original purpose and MO of the Calculator is far more entertaining and interesting, at least to me. Noah Cutler began his criminal career by crossing the country and getting into fights with various superheroes on purpose, analyzing and recording their battle tactics to ensure that he couldn't be beaten again. Or in some incarnations, he would simply get beaten and then press a button on his chest to ensure that he didn't get beat again. Maybe that was taking in the information or something, like how Iron Man would just say analyze his fight patterns and then come up with countermeasures, you know? But either way, okay, do you know how insanely overpowered that could have been? Just being able to press a button and then boom, you're instantly basically immune to Batman or Robin or even Superman. That would be absolutely amazing. You do this enough times and you could just do whatever you want. And then other criminals start paying you to do their crimes for them because you guarantee success. That's freaking nuts. Okay, I wish they kept that Calculator. That could have been an even bigger threat than Darkseid if he kept going at it like that. This is why I'm the hero, because I would be unstoppable as a a villain. Penultimately, in at number 2, Lex Joker. Lex Joker was created when John Dee, also known as Dr. Destiny, collapsed the DC universe in half. First appearing in Superman Batman number 60 in 2009, Lex Joker is the combination of, you guessed it, Lex Luthor and Joker. Lex Joker hired Doomstroke and Terranado to destroy the Justice Titans. However, after the JTs allied with Batman and Superman, he hired 4 more mercenaries to create the Brotherhood of Injustice. Thanks to Terra, who had gone undercover with the JTs, they were able to attack the Justice Tower, and come on, let's be honest, if you have the brains of Lex Luthor and the complete insanity of the Joker, you're making one heck of an opponent. When you have 2 powerful forces in comics, at some point there's like bound to be a mashup of the 2 to create a larger, even more powerful villain. And Lex Joker is probably the scariest combination we could have gotten that wasn't like Joker and Doomsday or Joker and Darkseid. Oh god, Joker Darkseid. And finally, in at number 1, the Eraser. The Eraser was the chosen alias of Lenny Fiasco, who turned to crime after living his college days under constant mocking and taunting by his classmates. Of course, it's because, you know, that's what college was like. No, that's high school, bro. Fiasco is a professional at covering the tracks of other crimes. For a 20% cut, the Eraser will erase the evidence of another crime. And honestly, I think that it's like the only job that anyone with the name Fiasco could have. The villain's power is a special helmet designed to look like a pencil eraser, because of course it is, that can wipe off evidence, even those that would be invisible to the naked eye, which is pretty damn cool when you think about it. After Batman posed as a villain to try to capture the Eraser, the villain told Bruce that he had became a criminal because Bruce had shattered his dreams of going out with Celia Smith. I'm not even gonna get into that, okay? Bruce didn't even remember her name, which made the Eraser angry. And I think that this is probably the absolute coolest concept for a supervillain, because in all honesty, if this guy wasn't an idiot, he could have ruled the world. Like, just straight up, this guy would absolutely ruin any and all investigations and then turn the tides of trials. This guy could have ended up being just like a shadow government in himself, okay? If only he wasn't just a dumb.
Number 10, the Inheritors. The Inheritors are Morland's crew and family. The clan Morland himself is also a part of. They're a powerful energy vampire clan which hunt down various totems and consume them. Because yeah, there aren't just spider totems out there apparently. I want to know though, are there anteater totems, and can I be one? Please write me into a comic as an anteater totem. Someone, please. Spider totems, for those who don't know, are spider folks from across the multiverse who are basically destined to end up being connected to the spirit of the spider, either possessing powers related to the spider or some other important connection which generally gives them purpose. The Inheritors ended up getting control over the Master Weaver and used their knowledge and power to traverse the multiverse and hunt down spider totems within it. The Inheritors are generally led by Solus or Morland, and the clan has included Verna, Genix, Karn, Bora, Brix, Dara, Deimos, Malos, Mortia, Namura, and Thanos. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by clicking that like button? Seriously, it feeds the algorithm and it feeds my soul. Number 9, Miriam Drew, or rather, a bunch of Miriam's Drews. Many of them. An army of them. A clone army of Miriam Drews. Who was Miriam Drew, you might be asking? Jessica Drew's mother. In the previous Spider-Woman series by Carlo Pacheco and Pere Perez, Jessica had to face off against a bunch of her mom's clones, after learning that the woman whose base she was in wasn't really her mother, but instead a clone of her. After watching her mom go from loving and considerate, seemingly having missed her daughter, to violent and aggressive, blaming Jessica for basically everything that had gone wrong in her life, Jessica then basically had to fight off an entire army of her mom's clones, ultimately. Like Jess at the time, her clone moms were also juicing, which also made them scary foes to face both in form and in power. If you don't believe me, read the series. Number 8, Zodiac. Zodiac is a blast from the past. He was a villain who was first introduced in 2010, but only recently reappeared in the comics, pledging to become Moon Knight's sworn nemesis. A very different vibe from Raul Bushman, honestly. Zodiac reminds me more of Joker or Deadpool when it comes to his antics. He's both brilliant, but also criminally insane. But it is his penchant for creative and deadly thinking that makes him honestly so dangerous. Like when he took on Moon Knight's ally, Reese, a vampire, not with a cross around his neck, but instead wearing his own name around his neck, as he clarified that it actually wasn't the cross vampires were weak to, it was faith, and Zodiac believes devoutly in only one thing: Zodiac. Number 7, Tyler Stone. Alchemax is a future villainous corporation from the 2099 Marvel Universe of Earth 928, but of course a corporation is only ever as evil as the people behind it. One of which is, of course, Tyler Stone, the vice president of Alchemax's R&D department. Tyler Stone is not only VP of Research and Development at Alchemax, but he is also secretly Miguel O'Hara's, aka Spider-Man 2099's, biological father. Miguel doesn't learn until later on that he is Stone's son, and ends up working for Alchemax as a brilliant geneticist. When he tries to leave, however, it is Stone who slips him the highly addictive and expensive substance, Rapture, made exclusively by Alchemax, to prevent him from leaving. Fortunately, Miguel manages to free himself by becoming his own experimental test subject, accidentally becoming the spider-like hero, Spider-Man 2099. Number 6. Zombie Ant-Man. In the Marvel Zombies world, Black Panther was one of the sole survivors when the zombies first attacked, and turned most of his friends into zombified versions of themselves. One such former friend, Hank Pym, actually just managed to trick T'Challa into coming with him. Or well, he almost did. Either way, Hank managed to trick T'Challa enough to get him to a place where he could basically incapacitate him and then hide him away. Having already begun to change himself, Hank basically planned to use Black Panther, his friend, as a food source. Because Hank is a genius, which means when he's a zombie, he's a really dangerous genius. Hank kept him locked away and alive while slowly savoring and devouring his friend. Fortunately, Black Panther would escape and even become the leader of a land of survivors, although he would eventually turn into a zombie himself, much later on. But lesson learned, watch out for zombie Hank Pym if there's a zombie apocalypse. Number 5. Taskmaster. In the comics, Tony Masters is Taskmaster, and he is well known as an Avengers villain. And it is through his clashes with that team that Taskmaster also became a recurring villain of Hawkeye as well. Now, you might not know it to just look at Taskmaster, but the two have had some pretty epic fights over the years, with Masters himself also possessing marksmanship skills to rival that of, get this, Hawkeye himself, and also being known as a villain who is proficient with the use of a bow and trick arrows. In the comics, Taskmaster has an eidetic memory, or a photographic memory, that also extends to him being able to replicate pretty much any abilities or skill sets that he sees. So while he can also mimic Hawkeye's skills and abilities, he can also match the fighting style of pretty much anyone he watches, as well as learn their specific skill set too, just from watching it, as long as it isn't a superpower specific skill like, you know, flying. Taskmaster is also known for being a brilliant tactician as a mercenary, and often uses strategic thinking to take down opponents who are more powerful than him, which is why he's one you honestly need to watch out for. Number 4. Xemnu. Xemnu is also known as the Living Hulk, and is a being that uses hypnosis powers to take control of others' minds. On more than one occasion, he has attempted to use these powers to try and conquer Earth and bend the minds of its entire populace to his will. In fact, while he's also attempted this feat in the pages of Immortal Hulk, this was also something he tried in his very first appearance. Back then, he was trying to mind control the human race in order to get them to build a ship to basically return him home. Doesn't sound like such an evil plan until you realize the force that the ship would have to create would basically rip the Earth asunder once that ship took off, due to the great force that it would need for that launch. So, pretty evil. Number 3. High Evolutionary. As we saw in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, the High Evolutionary is truly a villain to be feared. And honestly, when I found out that the High Evolutionary was going to be in the MCU, I was like, man, that's gonna be lame, because on paper, he's another kind of silly character, especially when you consider that he's often used as a scapegoat for retcons, bizarre origins, and honestly pretty weird plot points. The fact remains though, the High Evolutionary, as the film proves, is truly the be-all and end-all of Marvel's mad science department, and the god complex he has in the MCU basically sums up so beautifully what is so frightening about him when you really think about it. He thinks he's perfecting life, when really he's basically warping and polluting it. Number 2. Thane. Thane is Thanos' son, and while he might not look that intimidating, he's definitely proven himself to be deadly in the past. Initially, Thanos was hunting down Thane because he feared Thane's potential power surmounting his own. He's basically afraid that Thane will rise up and overtake him, but in the end this wasn't something that Thanos really had to be particularly afraid of, it turned out. Even after he became empowered with the Phoenix Force, Thanos still managed to somehow defeat Thane. And this was also at a point when Thanos seemed himself to kind of be dying. Thane ended up being stripped of the Phoenix Force and ended up sentenced to suffering a hell-like existence in the God Quarry for the rest of his life. Or at least until some writer remembers he's still down there and decides to pull him back up again. Thane was also an Inhuman, and his powers are actually perfect for someone who is known to be Thanos' son, and are also pretty OP, I gotta say. He had a Death Touch ability that, while untamed, basically killed anyone within a certain radius, and he could also trap people in a state of living death through encasing them in amber, which honestly sounds awful. Honestly, while he's in prison for now, I'd watch out whenever he gets out of that God Quarry and is free again. Number 1, Monarch. I feel like we're always sleeping somewhat on Jamie Braddock here, and we honestly don't talk about him enough, so I'm gonna bump him up to the top spot this time around. Monarch to you. Monarch is known for his reality warping powers, and while not always a villain, most of the time in the comics he has basically been a villain. What makes him different from other reality warping characters, and namely mutants out there? Monarch's powers work on a quantum level, and although there are people who can influence Monarch's powers by manipulating his mind, he also is pretty powerful as someone who can basically just make things happen by thinking them into existence. Yeah. He is the elder brother of twins Brian and Elizabeth Braddock, but despite being related to heroes, he seldom is one himself.
And for this list, starting off at number 10 is Magneto. Starting off this list with the absolute GOAT. Magneto has been around for a long time, and a majority of that time, he was a villain, or at best, an anti-hero. As the number 1 rival of Professor Charles Xavier, Magneto's view of the world is pretty interesting given that he was the child of a Jewish family during World War II, and yet, after years of persecution for being a mutant, he believed his race to be superior to regular humans nonetheless, and that humans should be subservient or destroyed. Under this mentality, he led the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants as well as other groups against the X-Men and the Earth's heroes. Now everybody knows that Magneto is not someone you mess with. He has enough power and enough experience to stomp almost anyone. For example, while he has become more of just a hero nowadays, there's a point where he gets his heart ripped out by a villain called Uranos. But he keeps himself alive by using his powers to keep his blood flowing. He's just that insanely powerful. But being born around World War II and the rival to Charles Xavier, he's been up there in the age department since he was introduced, but always manages to decimate his enemies. Number 9, Cassandra Nova. Sticking with X-related heroes, we have the evil twin, or counterpart, or anti-self to Charles Xavier. Cassandra Nova isn't really a mutant, but she isn't really a person either. She's actually what is known as a Mumadrai, the spirit that is equal to the opposite of a person. Wrap your head around that one. This is about to get wild, so buckle up. Because of the genetic mutant potential of Charles Xavier, his Mumadrai was able to create a physical form for itself when Sharon Xavier was pregnant with Charles, making Cassandra basically Xavier's twin. Now Charles, even as a baby, sensed Cassandra as an evil presence, and he used his psychic abilities to try and take her out in the womb. Cassandra survived though, and so she spent decades as this terrifying mass of cells in a sewer, building herself a new body and planning her revenge on her brother. Cassandra has all the same telepathic powers as Charles himself, plus some telekinetic abilities as well. But being a Mumadrai, she has the terrifying ability to manipulate DNA, breaking it down, copying it, and being able to construct physical bodies. She can even phase through solid objects, regenerate insanely fast, and enhance and evolve other mutant abilities. Number 8, Granny Goodness. Stepping away from Marvel for a moment, Granny Goodness is probably the complete opposite of anything we would describe as goodness. She was originally one of the lowlies, which is basically the peasant class on DC Universe's Apocalypse. From a younger age, she was taken by Darkseid and raised and trained to become head of the Shock Troops and the Female Furies. She has the responsibility to bring young warriors from other worlds to fight each other to earn the right to be trained by her. But Granny Goodness also has multiple orphanages where she both trains and disciplines younger individuals looking for potential warriors for Darkseid. Now, being a resident of Apocalypse, Granny here does have quite a bit of power. She has superhuman strength, speed, durability, and senses, as well as invulnerability and an advanced immune system and immortality. But being immortal doesn't necessarily save you from looking old as hell, which is why we get Granny Goodness. Number 7, horticulture. You know, sometimes sometimes a group of villains comes along that just kind of makes me smile. And Horticulture, who first appeared in X-Men Volume 5, number 3 in December 2019, are one such group. Horticulture is described on their wiki as a group of agrochemists, biotechnologists, and eugenic engineers who specialize in the genetic manipulation and propagation of all things botanical. So, to me and my tiny brain, I take that information and translate it to, it's a bunch of old plant scientist ladies. Because that's what they are. It's a bunch of older ladies who are seeking to radically depopulate humans from the Earth in order to bring the Earth and nature to a state of balance. With the climate the way it is right now, it's actually kind of an understandable cause, even if it's utterly insane. Using their know-how, they made biological modifications to themselves, like resistance to telepathy and extended lifespans, but they also developed technology to manipulate their environment, inhibit mutant powers, and generate illusions on men. But they also have experience as computer programmers, being able to access the Krakoan gateways and trade information with the villainous anti-mutant group known as Orcus. Number 6. Old Loki from the MCU. Alright, I'm going to step away from the pages of comic books altogether here. During the MCU's Loki show, Loki gets sent to the Void, where the whole place is basically filled with other alternate versions of himself. But he specifically became part of a group of 4 other Lokis. Boastful Loki, Alligator Loki, Kid Loki, and the topic for today, Classic Loki. Classic Loki had a similar story to regular Loki from the Sacred Timeline, but when confronted by Thanos in Avengers Infinity War, this Loki decided to use duplication magic to survive the whole thing. He then spent a hell of a long time on a remote planet, ashamed of the nefarious things he had done over time. When he finally tried to return to see his brother, Thor, who he missed, he was an older man, and them meeting caused a divergent timeline, getting himself pruned and sent to the Void. He has probably one of the best moments in the show. When Sylvie, Loki, and Mobius try to escape from the Void, and the reality-consuming Alioth tries to stop them, Classic Loki uses his magic to create a true-to-life, massive illusion of Asgard itself, all while this weird version of Ride of the Valkyries was playing in the background, distracting Alioth and giving me just straight-up goosebumps. Like, I am actually getting them right now just thinking about it. Like, it was such a cool moment. Satisfying. Number 5. Ra's al Ghul. Ra's al Ghul was born around 700 years ago, and thanks to the Lazarus Pits, he has been able to keep his body in working order. But he discovered the pits when he was an older gentleman and keeps the look of someone with a significant amount of years to him. After he came in contact with the pits, he eventually became a master martial artist and a master fencer, gaining a massive amount of wealth, and he started creating organizations to rid the world of crime, with his first being called the Demon, which the later League of Assassins is a branch of. Rage's purpose within the League of Assassins is to eliminate all evil in the world by destroying all of humanity and just starting all over. Obviously, that mentality means he routinely has run-ins with the superhero community, especially Batman, who he helped train. Rage has had many plans over the years that tried to destroy the world, and he has also beaten the entire JLA when he discovered Batman's notes. Now, with his years of experience and his vast amount of accumulated resources, this older fellow is a massive threat to both the heroes and the world. Number 4. The Joker. During the absolutely fantastic 3 Jokers storyline, we learn there have actually been 3 Jokers plaguing Gotham over the years, and among the 3 of them is the Golden Age Joker, and he is clearly much older than the other 2. Now, to be completely transparent here, whether this story is canon or not is an area of debate, so it's up to you if this one counts. But the Golden Age Joker, known as the Criminal, is the only one of the 3 Jokers to be a predominantly serious crime lord, and he even says that laughing and smiling is physically painful for him. Another thing that makes this entry a little arguable is that of these 3 Jokers, we don't know which one, if any of them, is the Joker. Even if only one remains in the end, the best part of this story is the uncertainty about which one is the one who started it all. Now, seeing as the Criminal is the oldest, classic version, he seems to be the one who started it all, creating more Jokers to mess with Batman. but the other two Jokers have been featured in incredibly important Batman stories as well. The comic really explores all of it, and if you haven't yet, make sure you check out Batman 3 Jokers as soon as possible. Number 3, Maestro. The Incredible Hulk has certainly been through the ringer in his decorated career, but few versions of the character are the living embodiment of that fact, like the Maestro. An alternate version of Bruce Banner from an apocalyptic future, this version of the character is far more intense and complex, but also much older. The best way to explain Maestro is to say that he is basically a smarter, older, villainous version of Dr. Bruce Banner, with all the powers and abilities of the original, but with a touch of nuclear radiation. He has much more of a cosmic and spiritual side to him than the normal Hulk does, but he is also twice as strong as Hulk is, and he retains all the intelligence of Bruce Banner, but with years and years more experience. Despite all that extra strength, brainpower, and experience, he still gets outmaneuvered by the Hulk, who sends Maestro back in time to the site of the Gamma Bomb that created them. But even then, the Maestro's spirit remains on the bones left behind after the explosion went off and he came back to life. Number 2, Agatha Harkness. Like a few of these villains, when we first met Agatha Harkness in Fantastic Four number 94 from October of 1969, she was already elderly. She started out as the nanny for the newly born Franklin Richards, and using her magical powers, she even saved the Fantastic Four from the Frightful Four and a handful of other villains, and also helped Franklin when his powers first started to emerge. But she went on to have an interesting relationship with the Scarlet Witch, Wanda Maximoff, but also her mother, Natalia Maximoff. That's because this sweet nanny Agatha is actually an incredibly ancient sorcerer who was around to remember the sinking of Atlantis nearly 18,000 years ago. And she was probably the most powerful of the original witches during the Salem witch trials, an event that she actually supported as she thought it would cull the weak magic users who held them back. Agatha, like a lot of older villains, is pretty damn complex. She has helped out heroes on multiple occasions, but she's also done some pretty sinister stuff. But there is no doubt that she is much stronger than both heroes and villains first assume. Number 1, Baron von Strucker. Baron Wolfgang von Strucker was born in the 19th century, so he ain't a young fella by any means. He fought with the Axis powers during World War II alongside and under the Red Skull. He was a top villain at the time, not just for Captain America, but more prominently as an adversary for Nick Fury and the Howling Commandos. And that carried through after the war ended, as Strucker was instrumental in the rise of Hydra and then became the Supreme Hydra. He was even responsible for the corruption of S.H.I.E.L.D., using Hydra to completely take over large parts of S.H.I.E.L.D. itself. When Captain America returned, and then the Red Skull did as well, Strucker began to lose his leadership role within Hydra, and so he faked his own passing, choosing to instead manipulate events from the shadows. Eventually though, Strucker got the Death Spore virus, which is why he is on this list. He's old, and many people don't know he has this particular enhancement. While he is an excellent strategist, a highly intelligent, exceptional hand-to-hand combatant, swordsman, and marksman who uses Hydra tech to live longer and be in top physical condition, the Death Spore virus bonded Strucker's DNA with the Death Spore itself, enabling him to be revived after passing away. He hasn't aged since getting the virus, he heals at an incredible rate, is invulnerable to minor injuries, resistant to toxins and disease, and he can even release the Death Spore virus from his body at will.
Mr. Sinister was once brilliant scientist and geneticist Dr. Nathaniel Essex. Nathaniel, however, turned to more mad science after the loss of his son, sadly. When offered an opportunity by Apocalypse to become more evolved, Essex ended up taking it. He claimed a new name based off of something his wife had called him upon learning of his true nature, Sinister. Mr. Sinister still seems obsessed with finding a way to fix his long dead son. Sinister has a particular obsession with the Summers family and even created Madeline Pryor, playing matchmaker to set her up with Cyclops so that the two would marry and produce a perfect mutant child, which Sinister later hoped to procure and study. Sinister also managed to devise a plan that allowed him to completely alter reality, making everything and everyone a part of his own sinister universe in Sins of Sinister. Basically like becoming a god, like becoming ruler of the universe. Now don't get me wrong, I think a lot of folks understand just how deadly this next mutant is, but I'm still not sure if folks see him as a real threat just because of where he's at right now. But a friendly reminder that when Vulcan first turned up in the comics during Deadly Genesis, that is just what he was. Someone who was threatening the X-Men after feeling as though he'd been abandoned by them. Vulcan is the other Summers brother. There's Cyclops, there's Havoc, and of course course, there is Vulcan, the youngest. Gabriel Summers, however, is maybe the most deadly of these three. Vulcan toiled to seize the Shi'ar Empire for himself after marrying Deathbird. When his father, Corsair, demanded that Vulcan stop his ruthless pursuit of power, by the way, Vulcan responded by killing him. Declaring himself emperor caused a great rift in the Shi'ar Empire, plunging it into a civil war. He also at times has been just generally a kind of awful brother to Havoc. Not cool, Vulcan. Honestly, this next villain is a terrifying one, and one that was kind of short-lived in terms of his appearances when you consider just how horrific he was. We're talking about Gregory Terrariton, aka Slayback. Slayback was a Deadpool villain who also had tanglings with Weapon X and kind of with mutants a little bit as a mercenary. He ended up being hired by a group who was hoping to use Deadpool's healing factor to find a cure for the Legacy virus. Inherently, this doesn't sound super villainous when I say it like that. It's like, well, that would be good, wouldn't it? But at the same time, they weren't doing this out of the kindness of their heart or to just save mutants, but they were simply doing it so they could make a fortune, as once they found the cure, they planned to charge a massive amount for it. Factor 3? That sounds like some kind of toothpaste. This is another villainous team composed of mutants but led by an alien known as Mutant Master. You might not remember it because it was only around for a few issues and also first appeared way early on in X-Men issue number 28 back in 1967. This team popped up a few times and would often force mutants into doing their bidding, often mind-controlling Banshee to attempt to kidnap or help kidnap Professor X. Fortunately, in issue number 39, Factor 3 was defeated for good and hasn't bothered the X-Men since, at least not as far as I know. But were they to come back, who is to say what kind of chaos they could sow? After all, they were a pretty impressive threat when they first showed up on the scene. Roughhouse is definitely a lesser known villain, though that doesn't mean we shouldn't be intimidated by him. Although he starts out as a villain in the Wolverine comics and a brute, he later kind of becomes Wolverine's ally after he was sold off by General Koi to be used for experimentation. Pretty messed up. Even Wolverine felt bad for this guy, despite being his rival and his enemy on Madripoor. Wolverine decided to go after him and as such became embroiled in a major political conflict in Tierra Verde, not to be confused with Terra Verde, a different republic that also exists in Marvel Comics. Despite Roughhouse saving Wolverine though and becoming temporary allies with him, Roughhouse would later go back to being a straight up villain of Logan, even renewing his partnership with Bloodscream, another lesser known villain from the 80s, later on. The Marauders are a team a lot of folks don't think about being a threat, especially not anymore considering we have since redeemed the team name with Kate Pryde's heroic Marauders team. But let's not forget what this team was capable of back in the day, and which powerhouse of a mutant brought this team together. It might surprise you to know that Gambit actually created the villainous Marauders team. Of course, he didn't do it because he was truly a villain deep down or anything like that. He basically did it all for Mr. Sinister. Remember when it was revealed that Gambit had a dark secret in the comics and everyone thought it was going to be that he was the witness and the person who ended up betraying the X-Men? It wasn't that. The secret was that he had worked for Mr. Sinister as a retroactive favor after Mr. Sinister had helped Gambit to control his powers by, well, removing a part of his brain. Mr. Sinister had Gambit assemble the Marauders and use them to attack the Morlocks, who he believed were abominations when it came to his pursuit of genetic advancement, resulting in the, as we know it, the Mutant Massacre. And Sinister also had the team hunt down and steal baby Nathan from Madeline Pryor. So they've done some pretty crazy things. Pretty impressive, crazy, villainous things, you know? Unus is of course one of my favorite X-Men villains. I do not think he gets enough love. He is a classic who first appeared on the scene back in the Stan Lee and Jack Kirby days. He was also a villain during the House of M era, though more in the sense that, you know, most mutants were kind of villainous because, you know, they basically were trying to rule the world or were on the verge of ruling the world. Unus the Untouchable is his full mantle, and when we first met him, he was using his mutant powers to cheat in the wrestling ring. Well, I don't know if we can really, you know, call using your mutant abilities cheating per se. I guess in the sense that they weren't being disclosed and that he wasn't wrestling other folks who were on the same level as him, but instead was, you know, wrestling with just regular humans who just had no powers. As you may have guessed, Unus generates basically a powerful force field which he can control that prevents him from being touched. Unus the Untouchable. The first time around, he gave the whole X-Men team major trouble, and it was only thanks to Beast's smarts that they were actually able to defeat him. Beast was able to make it so that Unus could no longer control his powers, so that they were on full force all the time, which also prevented Unus from eating or drinking anything. Needless to say, they wore Unus down and he ended up changing his tune and agreed to stop his villainy. The Blob is a classic villain who I just think does not get enough love for how powerful he is. Honestly, back in the early days of the X-Men, after learning he was a mutant, the Blob almost single-handedly took down the entire X-Men team. They at first attempted to recruit him, and that's when he learned he was a mutant, but after learning of that fact and that his abilities were actually mutant powers, the Blob decided that he didn't actually need the X-Men and that he was actually more powerful than all of them combined and cooler than them. And when they refused to let him leave, since they had revealed their secret identities to him, this was back when the X-Men had secret identities, by the way, and attempted to keep him captive in the X-Mansion, after narrowly escaping, he swore to get revenge on them, and honestly, kind of rightfully so. He returned with the rest of the circus and sideshow performers that he worked with, intimidating the ringleader into even taking orders from him. They returned to the X-Mansion and very nearly ended the X-Men team. The Legacy Virus is one of the most deadly threats we've seen in the comics. We have talked about the Terrigen Mists on part 1, but the Legacy Virus plagued the X-Men and the whole world of mutants after being released accidentally by Mr. Sinister. In fact, Mr. Sinister felt so bad about this, he even tried to work out a cure himself for the virus. As much as he's a villain, Sinister still loves mutant kind and definitely did not want to see them completely wiped out. The virus itself was created by Strife, Cable's evil clone. It only affected those with the mutant X gene. The first time a mutant used their powers after contracting the virus, you would see it activate. This original strain of the virus basically acted like a fast-acting cancer in those who were affected, and we know it as Legacy 1 virus, the first strain of the Legacy virus. And that isn't all. There were actually 2 strains for the Legacy virus, and while the second strain was not as fast acting as the first, I would still argue that it was worse. This strain of the virus was slower acting and would actually cause mutants to lose control of their powers before they die, basically becoming a ticking, superpowered, uncontrollable time bomb. But before this happened, symptoms of those suffering from it would include skin lesions, cough, fever, and autoimmune deficiency, lowering their immune system and making them more vulnerable to other illnesses. So yeah, basically this version of the virus was like the mutant version of our world's AIDS. Pretty terrible. Number 10, J. Jonah Jameson. While JJ might not seem like the craziest supervillain out there, he has his moments, truly. Sure, he's just a guy who most of the time causes Spider-Man more grief in his civilian identity of Peter Parker as his loudmouthed, often angry and demanding boss, but if he gets his hands on robots, whew, watch out. JJ isn't at the level of world domination underestimation, but for the most part, Spider-Man fans generally just think of JJ as a nuisance, a menace, if you will, to Peter's everyday life. However, JJ has not only threatened Peter's livelihood and Spider-Man's reputation, but has also even gone toe-to-toe with Spider-Man himself, and even at one point took on She-Hulk. Typically, he's at his most dangerous whenever he gets his hands on the Spider Slayer robots or armor, which he often uses to more directly hunt Spider-Man or other heroes down himself, using muscles, or robo-muscles I guess, as opposed to just the written word. And let's not forget that the written word and media itself are also way more powerful than we maybe give them credit for, both in the comics and in real life. Number 9, Sandman. The only thing that really holds Sandman back from being so deadly is his own disinterest in crime. In the end, Sandman often resents what he has become and even grows to resent being a criminal. There are even times in the comics when Sandman has tried to turn over a new leaf and go against his story as a villain, becoming reformed, preferring to stay neutral, lawful, and of course even at times teaming up and aiding heroes. This is really what holds him back though. That, and in some cases, the vacuum cleaner. Though really that shouldn't have been able to hold Sandman at all, considering that he can control the sand that makes him up, which means that yeah, he can just kinda like move out of the vacuum cleaner, right? As sand particles. Sand is a powerful substance. It can cut you, it can get inside a wound, it's minuscule, it can get through and into almost any room or location, as it can pass through the smallest nooks and crannies. Sandman is also virtually immortal and can create duplicates of himself, allowing him to access a giant form by balling up all of these duplicates together. Now imagine if he did something like this, but on the scale of all of the sand in the world. Let's not forget that scientists have estimated that there are more grains of sand on planet Earth than stars within our universe. I know stars are bigger than grains of sand, sand, but still, there's a lot of sand on this planet, like a lot of sand. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists about Spider-Man villains, let us know by clicking that like button. Number 8, Morbius. Another villain that is really only curbed, I think, because of his often more heroic nature and sense of humanity is Morbius. Okay, so Morbius might not be a global level threat like we were talking about in the intro, but he's definitely more powerful than you might think. A lot of people probably don't think about Morbius much at all, I imagine, but like the Lizard, if he's completely feral and unreserved, he's pretty dangerous. Recently in the comics, we saw that Morbius is back to being a fearsome, uncontrolled, ruled by his hunger, pseudo-science vampire, when he comes up against Ben Reilly's Spider-Man during the Beyond Spider-Man event. Ben struggled to fight against Morbius, and if it wasn't for some help from Beyond, he may have even died as a result of their battle. In the end, it took the Daughters of the Dragon duo, Colleen Wing and Misty Knight, together to take down Morbius, and even then, they may have only been able to do so because Morbius at that point was missing an arm. Dr. Michael Morbius can be quite strong when his power is completely unleashed, and there's nothing holding him back. Number 7, Flash Thompson. Flash Thompson isn't a villain anymore in the comics, but he did start out as one. And from his humble beginnings, you likely would not have imagined that he'd become so powerful as a character. Flash Thompson started out as Peter Parker's schoolyard bully. He didn't have any powers, he was just kind of a jerk. Over time though, Flash became less of an oaf and eventually even became a friend to Peter. He then goes on to serve in the military, becoming a decorated hero, and even becomes a superhero after he becomes Agent Venom, teaming up with the Venom symbiote who also has a villainous origin story. Sure, Agent Anti-Venom, aka Flash Thompson, probably won't be the guy threatening the entire world because, well, he's a hero, but he definitely now possesses enough power to instead be a hero who could potentially save the world. And considering that he was just your average run-of-the-mill high school bully, you probably wouldn't have expected him to come so far. Number 6, Sauron. I've always felt bad for Sauron. Like, this dude does not get enough love when it comes to our boosting of supervillains here on the channel. I know Sauron seems kinda silly on paper, but he's also pretty diabolical and deadly when he wants to be. And if the person writing the character also believes in his prowess. Sauron can temporarily absorb mutant powers, is super strong, and somehow has functional pterodactyl hands that he can use to pick up weapons and items. I don't even know how he does that. That's nuts to me. Sauron is also an energy vampire, which means his powers are literally deadly. He needs life force energy to live, and when he absorbs life force energy, it can actually result in the death of his victim. Honestly, I think if he just had the right team up, he could be pretty unstoppable. Maybe with X-Men Green, he'll be able to do something crazy. I really want X-Men Green to be like a super villain team, like kind of like Poison Ivy. Like, we're villains, but we're like saving the planet. Number 5, Sin Eater. Sin Eater saw a massive power upgrade recently. Initially, he was just a crazed man obsessed with absolving the sins of others through killing them. But more recently, in Nick Spencer's run on Spider-Man in 2020, he became so much more than that. In issue number 46, we see Sin Eater with newfound powers to actually absorb and absolve the sin of villains, and with those sins, he would also gain their powers. This meant that the sky was almost the limit for just how powerful of a villain Sin Eater could become. However, after learning that he was being manipulated by Kindred and kinda used as a pawn, Sin Eater became distraught and ended up taking his own life. He would later be resurrected as a corpse, but we don't really know what happened to said corpse after he was brought back and the fight against Kindred sort of came to a close. He could still be out there somewhere though, and who knows, he could have some of his former hyped up powers. I doubt it, but even if he doesn't, he did have it at one point, so I think we should count it. It was pretty cool. Number 4, Chameleon. Chameleon is definitely a hero who deserves more love and respect, or at least more disdain if you love to hate the greatest villains. He was the first villain that Spider-Man ever faced in his own series. A lot of people don't think of shapeshifters or masters of disguise first when it comes to power levels, but the reality is, someone who is really good at disguising themselves as other people can be one of the most deadly and unstoppable villains around. I mean, look at what Mystique managed to do recently in X-Men's Inferno series, or look at what Chameleon might seemingly be up to currently in Devil's Reign. Not only is Chameleon great at creating chaos and hurting others by disguising himself as them, but he also is pretty good at just hatching plans as well. Number 3, Kingpin. When it comes to Kingpin, we usually think of him as a threat confined to New York City. In fact, some people don't even think of Kingpin at all when it comes to Spider-Man. Over the years, Kingpin has become more synonymous with the superhero Daredevil, even though Kingpin's first appearance was actually in a Spider-Man comic, making his first appearance in Amazing Spider-Man issue number 50 during the original 1963 series. Lately in the comics, Kingpin has been setting his sights on a much more grand prize than just causing grief for New York, its citizens, and its heroes. He is taking on all of the superheroes based in the US that oppose him as he aims to run for president, using Kilgrave, yes, the Purple Man's powers, to encourage everyone to vote for him. Or else. Superheroes who do not ally themselves with Kingpin in this endeavor will face his wrath during Marvel's Devil's Reign event. Number 2. Mysterio. Another villain that often gets dismissed when it comes to Spider-Man's rogues gallery is Mysterio. Mysterio is a villain that is all smoke and mirrors, and illusions, which makes a lot of folks consider him to be not so real of a threat. Still, in the cinematic take on the character, we saw Mysterio almost completely fool the entire world, or while even being defeated, he kind of still did that. His plan here was to convince everyone that he was a hero and win them over to his side, and even despite seemingly dying, he actually still managed to kind of succeed. In the Old Man Logan universe, Mysterio is also the one behind defeating pretty much all of the X-Men by tricking Wolverine into thinking all of his friends were really supervillains, thereby getting Wolverine to kill the entire X-Men team and the school. Yikes. In other words, just because you think something isn't real doesn't mean that you shouldn't still fear it and that it can't still hurt you. A great illusion can be more powerful than actual action in some cases. Number 1. Dr. Octopus. Dr. Octopus is a villain that might be well respected among Spider-Man fans, but on a greater scale, he's not likely someone you think of when you think of a global level supervillain threat. But while he might not share the status of comic book villains like Doctor Doom, it doesn't mean that he doesn't deserve to instill that level of fear among the superhero community. Dr. Octopus might seem a bit silly with his haircut and his mechanical arms and his sometimes snazzy white suit and sunglasses, but let's not forget that he's actually a diabolical super genius whose brilliance combined with the sheer strength of his claws makes him a dangerous person to cross. Some might say he's just superior.
Coming in at number 10, we have the intelligent zombie Solomon Grundy. Inspired by a 19th century English nursery rhyme, Solomon Grundy was born centuries ago as a wealthy merchant, but after being murdered and having his body dumped in a swamp with mystical properties, he's now cursed to constantly be resurrected with slightly different properties each time. Usually being depicted as an incredibly physically strong zombie, Grundy's greatest power is his resilience to both magic and physical damage, meaning that every time he's faced by Batman, he needs to figure out a whole new clever plan to find a way to properly defeat him. Coming in at number 9, we've got to go with Clayface. When you're facing off against the world's greatest detective, being able to disguise yourself as anyone seems like a pretty useful skill to have. This alone would make Clayface a difficult foe for Batman to overcome, but combine that with the huge amounts of physical strength that Clayface possesses when he changes into his more monstrous Hulk-like form, and you have a rare mix of stealth and strength that keeps Bruce Wayne on his toes. This ability to manipulate others through careful mimicry allows Clayface to be far more intelligent than he appears. And while his skill as an actor comes across as funny in depictions such as the Harley Quinn TV show, it can be quite deadly under more serious circumstances. Coming in at number 8, we've got to go with the bladed assassin, Deathstroke. While in recent years, Slade Wilson has become more well-known for tormenting the Teen Titans, Deathstroke has also had many run-ins with the Justice League and the Dark Knight himself. With his brain operating at 9 times the efficiency of a normal human brain, Deathstroke is exactly the type of opponent that pushes Batman to his physical limits, with a complete mastery of every weapon he has at his disposal. Combine that with his Icon suit, which has been shown to even be able to withstand a punch from metahumans such as Superman, and this is a foe that Batman is always just barely able to outwit and defeat. Coming in at number 7, we have the malicious psychologist known as Hugo Strange. One of Batman's oldest villains, originally debuting only a few issues after the Caped Crusader himself in Detective Comics, Professor Hugo Strange was also one of the very first villains to ever figure out his secret identity as Bruce Wayne. While initially depicted as a typical mad scientist stereotype, more recent interpretations of the character have seen him as a devious manipulator, using his position of power as a doctor of psychology to examine the criminals of Arkham Asylum and scheming to gain power throughout Gotham City. It's this emphasis on mental ability rather than actual superpowers that makes Hugo Strange such an interesting villain to deal with, and the fact that he's consistently been able to figure out Batman's biggest secret in multiple different universes means that Hugo Strange just might be one of Bruce Wayne's biggest threats. Coming in at number 6, we have Bane, the villain who broke the Bat. A brilliant tactical warrior who was raised from childhood inside an island prison, Bane's most notable act was when he systematically eliminated Batman's support system and eventually faced and bested him in single combat, shattering Bruce Wayne's spine over his knee. This victory over the Dark Knight was only temporary, but has still given Bane an intimidating reputation that he more than lives up to, going on to become a supervillain crime boss and proving that Bane isn't just about pure physical strength, but that he's also a ruthless and brutal strategist as well, even willing to kill Alfred Pennyworth just to emotionally shatter Damian Wayne. It just goes to show that you should never ever underestimate Bane. Coming in at number 5, we have Oswald Cobblepot, aka the Penguin. The owner of the Iceberg Lounge, perhaps the most famous criminal hangout in all of Gotham City, the Penguin might look similar to his namesake, but is far more deadly in reality. While an impressive crime lord even without any superhuman enhancements, the Penguin is made extra deadly by the special umbrella he carries, which is always stuffed to the brim with different lethal gadgets to help him fight against Batman or any other supervillain that seems interested in starting a turf war. This unpredictability and Oswald's sanity not quite being all there make the Penguin an incredibly difficult opponent to read, hiding the fact that this crime lord is far more dangerous than he initially appears. Coming in at number 4, we've got the reality-warping Bat-Mite. A troublesome imp from the same fifth dimension as the Superman villain Mr. Mxyzptlk, the Bat-Mite is honestly more of a nuisance than a flat-out supervillain, often appearing just to try and challenge Batman or to see more of his heroic acts. Sending Bat-Mite back to his own dimension is usually a tall order given his complete reality-warping powers, but luckily the world's greatest detective is usually smart enough to outwit Bat-Mite and send him packing to where he truly belongs. However, fifth-dimensional beings have nearly limitless power within our regular three-dimensional universe, meaning that Bat-Mite should probably have a close eye kept on him in the future. Coming in at number 3, we have Arthur Brown, aka the Clue Master. Not to be confused with the similarly themed Riddler, the Clue Master is a former game show host who wound up turning to crime in order to pay the bills. The father of Batman ally Spoiler, the Clue Master for a time seemed to embrace the role of being a second-rate supervillain, before it was eventually revealed that his status as a Riddler ripoff was actually intentional, and that organizing Batman's more underrated foes was his master plan all along to avoid detection. It's not often that a villain is able to temporarily outwit the Caped Crusader, and Clue Master shows just how powerful the right man with a plan can become. Coming in at number 2, we've got Poison Ivy. Born under the name of Pamela Isley, Poison Ivy has always been dead set on protecting the green plant life of the planet Earth, and especially values it over human life. While well known for being able to control plants and utilizing poisonous kisses as a weapon, Ivy's powers may be beyond what she usually shows off. In a particularly noteworthy storyline, Poison Ivy was able to mind control essentially the entire human population of Earth through their consumption of fruits and vegetables. And while that's definitely some weird comic book logic as to how that would work, Batman was only barely able to defeat her by bringing her into contact with the one human being she cares about the most, Harley Quinn. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have the Batman Who Laughs. In a dark alternate world where the Joker realizes he's dying and begins a mass killing spree of everyone in Gotham, Batman is forced to finally kill his iconic foe. Unfortunately, at the moment of death, Bruce Wayne is infected with a special brand of Joker venom that completely flips his moral compass, but leaves intact all of his intelligence and tactical planning. All of the chaos of the Joker with the brains of Batman, this supervillain is Bruce Wayne's worst nightmare come to life, and was able to become so powerful over the course of his war against the multiverse that he was only able to be defeated by a literal God mode powered Wonder Woman.
Number 10, Scarlet. When Jason Todd's Red Hood first returned from the dead, he was much more villainous than he has since become. Yes, he was a vigilante, but in the context of the stories he was appearing in, he was a Batman villain. In Battle for the Cowl, he even tried to murder both Tim Drake and Dick Grayson. After Dick Grayson became the new Batman while Bruce Wayne was dead, Jason created a more flamboyant Red Hood costume and even took on a sidekick to help him in his insane and murderous war on crime. Sasha, otherwise known as Scarlet. Sasha was the daughter of one of Professor Pig's henchmen, who tried to leave Gotham when things were getting too intense. Pig found out about this and decided to capture the man and his daughter and turn them into members of his Dollatron minions. This process involved disfiguring surgeries and brainwashing. Her father was converted, but Pig was stopped before the process could be completed on her. She smothered her father in prison and was rescued by Jason, who took her on as his murderous sidekick. This career was short-lived, and she is not as effective as other sidekicks. However, she did manage to defeat and capture Damian Wayne through a strategic use of a taser and a knife. When Jason was defeated by Batman and Robin, Scarlet fled town, never to be seen again. Number 9, Harley Quinn. Harleen Quinzel was a psychiatrist at Arkham Asylum who fell in love with one of her patients, the Joker. He manipulated her into breaking him out of prison and joining him in a lifestyle of murder and mayhem. Harley meant nothing to the Joker, but he was able to use his manipulation skills to keep her around for years, being his most consistent and trusted assistant. She took on his clown gimmick as her own, through makeup or by a dip in a chemical bath, depending on the continuity. Despite being a psychiatrist, Harley is a skilled martial artist and acrobat, being able to defeat most of the foes she comes across with relative ease. She eventually realized how toxic her relationship with Joker was and went out on her own, eventually becoming more of an anti-hero at this point. Joker has since taken on a new protege, Punchline, but really, she's just a replacement Harley that DC created because they couldn't use Harley as a straight-up villain anymore, so why talk about it? Number 8, Talia al Ghul. Daughter of the infamous League of Assassins leader Ra's al Ghul, Talia witnessed the death of her mother and was put in the care of her father. Together, they traveled the world, and Talia was trained by her father to emulate his skills and intellect. She eventually fell in love with Batman, and Ra's orchestrated a false abduction of her and Robin in order to test Batman's skills and see if he would be a suitable heir. Batman, of course, refused to join forces with Ra's despite his feelings for Talia. Talia eventually became the heir and would go on to become the leader of the League of Assassins whenever Ra's is dead. Her and her father have a tense relationship due to her conflicting allegiances and his willingness to sacrifice her for the greater good if needed. She is the mother of Damian Wayne, Batman's biological son and the current Robin. Speaking of which, number 7, Injustice Nightwing. In the Injustice universe, Superman snaps and becomes a real dick. He decides that criminals cannot be allowed to live and sets about exterminating them. When he gets to Arkham Asylum to end the lives of its inmates, Superman is confronted by Batman, Damian's Robin, and Dick Grayson's Nightwing. Damian has always been the most bloodthirsty of the Robins since he was raised by assassins, and he actually has a higher body count than even the Red Hood. So perhaps it shouldn't be too surprising that he actually agreed with Superman that the criminals should be destroyed. This led to an argument with Nightwing that resulted in Damian throwing one of Nightwing's weapons at him. Damian expected him to dodge, but Dick was distracted because of the massive prison break that was happening, and it hit him in the head. He fell to the ground and broke his neck. Batman blamed Damian for Dick's death, you know, because it was entirely his fault, and this led to their relationship becoming damaged to the point of no return, and Damian was taken under Superman's wing, and he eventually took up his fallen brother's mantle as the new Nightwing. This Damian considers Superman more of a father than Bruce ever was, but this is actually just a manipulation on Superman's part to get an ally who is well suited for helping him take out Batman. This is evidenced by how Superman sent the mass murderer Victor Zsasz after Alfred, knowing that Batman's refusal to kill Zsasz even after the death of Alfred would destroy any chance they had of fixing their relationship and solidify Damian's loyalty to him. Number 6. Karai. Last time I talked about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I got their names and weapons mixed up, because honestly, I never got into them as a kid, since, you know, the cartoon stopped airing when I was 2, so I'll have to be careful with this one. Karai in the original comics is a agent of the Foot who comes to New York after the death of the Shredder and sorta takes things over. When the 2003 animated series, which I also never watched because I was strictly a Batman kid growing up, when that series came out, Karai was given more backstory. The audience learned that she was Shredder's adopted daughter who he had taken in and raised after she was abandoned by her parents. He trained her in ninjutsu and she became his most trusted follower, eventually being put in charge of the Japanese Foot Clan. In her appearances in other media in the years since, this new backstory is sometimes adopted, but it's interesting that her status as Shredder's sidekick or co-worker really just depends on which version you're exposed to. In the 2012 animated series, she can also spit venom and transform into a snake girl, so that's kind of fun. Number 5. Terra. Terra Markov was a member of the Teen Titans, but unbeknownst to her teammates, she was actually the protege of the team's arch-nemesis, Deathstroke. She was feeding information to Deathstroke, which he used to capture the Titans, but when Deathstroke's son, Jericho, used his powers of possession to use Deathstroke to free the Titans, Terra thought she was being betrayed by her mentor and snapped, collapsing the hive complex they were in down around her and crushing herself to death. Terra had the power of geokinesis, which means that she could earthbend. She used this power to throw rocks, which she could also sharpen to deadly points with her mind, and could even cause earthquakes at will. She could use this power to rip rock or earth from the ground, which she would stand on and cause to fly at great speeds, giving her the power of flight. Years after her death, she was made a member of the Black Lantern Corps, and her zombified corpse returned to life with the powers of a Black Lantern ring in addition to her usual power set. Number 4. Dex-Starr. Dex-Starr started life as a stray cat in Brooklyn. He was adopted by a woman who took him in and gave him a pretty wonderful life full of love and yarn. When his owner passed away in a home invasion gone wrong, Dex found himself back on the streets. When two rather cruel humans decided to have some fun by putting him in a sack and throwing him off of a bridge, a Red Lantern ring, sensing the rage in the cat's heart, granted Dex the powers of a Red Lantern. Dex-Starr has since become a regular member of the Red Lantern Corps and is probably the most powerful cat in the DC universe. And don't underestimate him. He is extremely brutal and violent and is responsible for the deaths of several humans, a Yellow Lantern, and at least one Black Lantern. Although he has sworn vengeance for the life of his original owner, he still enjoys a good cuddle from his new master, Atrocitus. Despite Atrocitus's typical brutality, he shows a real soft spot for his cat, often referring to him as a good kitty, and flying into a rage if anyone hurts him. Normally I'd say this makes Dex a pet, not a sidekick, but I think he qualifies as both. I mean, Superboy's sidekick for years was Krypto the Superdog, so I think this counts. Number 3. Inertia. Thaddeus Thawne is a clone made up of Thawne and Bart Allen's DNA in the 30th century. His power is to slow down time around him, giving him the appearance of super speed. He operates as an independent villain for the various Flashes, even managing to kill Impulse before being captured by Wally West, who slowed him down to the point where he was essentially a statue, which Wally then put on display at the Flash Museum, forced to look at a statue of the speedster hero he'd killed for the rest of time. He was eventually freed by Hunter Zolomon, aka Zoom. Zoom then took Inertia under his wing, renaming him Kid Zoom. Although very powerful, his time as Kid Zoom was cut short when he killed Weather Wizard's son, resulting in the Rogues teaming up and taking him out with extreme prejudice. Number 2. Christoph Bernard. When Dr. Doom returned to Latveria in Fantastic Four number 247, he discovered that a revolution had taken place, and he had been replaced by a man named Zorba Fortunov. He came across a young boy named Christoph and his mother, who were still loyal to their former leader. Christoph's mother was killed by a robot, and once he had regained control of his homeland, Dr. Doom took in Christoph, raised him, and eventually made him his heir. Christoph is a super genius, much like his teacher, having a knowledge of science and magic that apparently rivals even the original Doom. When Doom was killed in battle, Christoph was made the new Dr. Doom, but the Doom bots transferred Doom's memories into Christoph, making him think that he was the real Doom. This of course led to trouble when the real Doom returned, and upon defeating Christoph, Doom had him deposed and sent into exile. But the two eventually patched things up, with Christoph stepping in as as Latveria's interim leader whenever Von Doom is unavailable. Number 1. Nimona. Nimona is the lead character of the graphic novel of the same name by N.D. Stevenson. It tells the story of a young girl who decides that she wants to be the sidekick of the greatest villain in the realm, Ballister Blackheart. She has magical powers that allow her to shapeshift. She can use this power to disguise herself as someone else, or to become any animal she wants. She's only limited in the fact that the animal has to be a real creature, but that's not much of a limit, as she lives in a world where dragons are real. She also has an incredible healing factor, having healed arrow wounds and a decapitated head with little to no trouble. The story soon goes in a direction where it is clear that Blackheart and Nimona are operating as villains in order to liberate their homeland from an evil dictatorship, which of course opens up a lot of thematic ideas of what actually makes people villains, but it is a cool read that has been adapted into an animated Netflix film which is scheduled to be released sometime this year.